private sector. That process for us fundamentally is negotiation. Negotiation, social dialogue, collective bargaining, enshrined deeply within the context of the private sector helps to stabilize a lot of things in that sector. While there are peculiarities, talking of federalism, there are peculiarities in each state. Cost of living differs within the context of Lagos to Kano to Kaduna to Port Harcourt. But within that complexity, the private sector has also found a way to create buffers for those working in areas where we believe strongly that the cost of living is higher than others. And a lot of concepts come into play. The basic remuneration in the context of wage remains as it were, but those businesses, our members have found a way to also come up with schemes that addresses the peculiarity of each state. Somebody working in Lagos will probably enjoy the same kind of salary with somebody working in Borno State, but there are variations that have been institutionalized through also the mechanism of collective bargaining and agreements that also recognizes the peculiarities of those states in the context of their cost of living, and now it affects the take-home pay of employees. So for us, labor issues being in the exclusive list, perfect for us, but we cannot throw away those peculiarities within the context of the level of development for one region to the other. And those are issues that we have to address, and we have to address frontally. So drawing experience from the private sector will help the public sector a lot, not only within the context of salary, not in the context of remuneration, and also within the context of productivity, which forms the basics, the main basis of remuneration or allowances or sharing of the wealth within the context of the private sector. So those would be my initial thoughts. A lot to learn from the private sector. We say that the private sector creates 8 out of every 10 jobs. So for us, the imperative for that sector to remain competitive, to remain sustainable, becomes very, very important, not only for the business owners, but also for the nation as it were. And if the private sector can do that, I think a bit can be learned from that system that we can replicate in the public sector, especially as it deals with the issue of federalism and then the fixing of the national minimum wage, which has been addressed fundamentally by ILO Convention 131. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General of NECA. Let me now invite Comrade Ismail Bello, who is representing the NLC President, for his initial intervention.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I also will take it from the point of view of the consistent position of the NLC in terms of retaining minimum wage setting on the exclusive list. And our reasons for this are very obvious. There is a general misconception about minimum wage. Minimum wage is not the same thing as regular wage negotiation. I think that is where the private sector has gotten it right. There's a confusion in the public service about minimum wage and regular wage negotiation. And that's one line of thinking. The other is also that wages has some connection with the macroeconomic realities and the role of government in provisioning of basic necessities for its citizens, including workers. Now, let me take the first line of thought, which is on why do we favor a minimum wage on the exclusive list. We know we have 36 state structure and we have the FCT. And we do not see anything wrong. Also, that is in line with the tripartite arrangement that is also favored by the ILO for the federal government to set the wage floor. We are talking about the minimum. We are talking about the bottom below which public or private. I think that's the idea. However, we've also seen Lagos and a state like Lagos raise the bar above the nation. They are coping with it. They are coping with it. So if there are states that are able to make they shouldn't go below. The idea is to actually protect it. So it's not and it should not be substitute for routine wage negotiation. I also think that the idea of 5 review for minimum wage is completely true, not in tandem with current economic reality. Several nations have a period of 1 or 2 years. I think that given the turbulent environment around 5-year tenure, which sometimes become 9 years or even 10 years, completely distort the wage review processes. Talking about what should be the responsibility of government, let's take the minimum wage of 1981, which was the first minimum wage act. As at 1981, government provisioning for healthcare was accessible to the worker. As at 1981, government provisioning for public education was basically accessible to very ordinary work. But we've seen the transformation of the economy, that responsibility has been shifted back to the individual. And as the individual been able to earn sufficient money that will cover for his housing, that will cover for his transport, that will cover for his health care, that will provide for the education of his children. You can see the burden that the worker has to carry. The worker in 1981 who received 125 naira, which was like $200 plus, didn't have to worry about which school the child will go. Didn't have to worry about which hospital he will go. Justice Kanye made a particular reference to a particular case before him, where he ruled that somebody who was on allowance was not, if I get that right, sir, was not on salary. How did we arrive at the concept of allowances? In 1981, your paycheck is your paycheck. Salary, wages, as whatever it's called. But today, you have basic salary component, housing allowance, the transport allowance, all of them combined cannot guarantee the worker, whether that worker is a cleaner, whether that worker is a director. There's a big problem that we need to address using the mechanism of collective bargaining and using social dialogue to expand the space of social dialogue to include discussions around macroeconomic indicators and how that will feed into the bargaining processes. I agree with our colleague from the private sector. I also have private sector background. And you see where you allow collective bargaining to take root. Take the textile sector, for instance. It's a sector that is in crisis. But have you had one labor dispute there? No, because the parties have a way to put the issues on the table and discuss them. If it's about review of salaries, they review. If it's about productivity issues, they discuss. There's a template that I think works, and I think maybe we need to rethink our bargaining structure in the public service to reflect some of these realities and to take on board some of these challenges.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ismail Bello. Let me now invite the chairman of the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission for his first salvo. Chairman, sir.
Thank you, moderator. Each time I go to the filling station, that's when the station would have no fuel. I was worried when he skipped. When I made the opening statements today, I said we would rather be listening to contributions and not make value-loaded statements. But I would simply like to state certain facts that what we have in Nigeria is a unified national minimum wage. Is not the norm across other political jurisdictions. Some countries that have a federal system like ours would also have different minimum wages for their own states. If you look at the US, they have a federal minimum wage, and the states also have their own aspects of that, but that of the federal is designated for certain categories of workers. How is the Salaries Commission involved in all this? We normally provide the secretariat when the National Minimum Wage panel is set up to collate the papers, collate views, and service the outcome of whatever is going to be the process. But the good with the 2019 National Minimum Wage Act is that it has introduced active monitoring. That from 2020, you should be monitoring the compliance of what has been put in place, which would serve as materials for determining the next one, which the Commissioner Compensation stated shortly before we went on break, 2024. The funds for the first leg of monitoring has just been released, and as soon as we're done with this forum, we'll begin to look at how states and private sector have been implementing what was legislated upon. Now, the original idea of the national minimum wage was that at the federal level, it was to affect only those organizations that had persons earning below 30,000. You know, we were moving from 18,000 up. And at the time that act came into being, a lot of agencies of government were already earning way above that 30,000. But as usual, there was this general perception that this is a general wage review. Right? That's why I'm raising this issue about general wage review and the national minimum wage. And so almost all agencies, including those that had nobody earning below 30,000, agitating to have adjustments to their salaries. Those who are already on 18, when you adjust somebody who is on 18 and move the person up to 30, it means that whoever was above that 18 must have been maybe about 20 or 25. So it will affect the next 11. So we now have to do what was known as consequential adjustments. And the rippling effect went up to the last grade level in the structure. We would have noted that during those negotiations, Labour came with the offer that we should have a flat increase across board. But as negotiations went on, it now made it appear, when we're talking about equity, that if you're giving, say, a 26% increase, that will move you from, say, 18,000 to 30,000. And you apply that same percentage to the man who's already earning at the top. You are also introducing what? Inequalities. So at the end of the day, after collective bargaining, all parties agreed that it should be cascaded in such a way that the rippling effect as we go up was reducing. And so the function of NSIWC was to issue the circulars giving effect to all those collective agreements. Now, don't forget that there are certain agencies that are not unionized, and so the function of NSIWC is to protect such organizations and advise government on what percentages should be added. And that we did, and it went across the board. Now, when we see jurisdictions that periodically add automatic increases across board to salaries, it's very easy to do that when you have one-digit inflation. If you do a 2% increase of salaries across board like they did in the US, at that time, the inflation rate was also one digit. And it make a substantial impact. But when you want to make a 2% in an economy that is maybe 16%, you probably would end up irritating the people you think you want to assist. So we are guided by some of these factors. I would like to also let you know that one of the functions we do in the Salaries and Wages Commission is not just to look at salaries and allowances and recommend increases to government. We do what is called appropriate and real wages analysis. That means that if I give you 30,000 in 2019, we also carry out studies. How much is that 30,000 worth in 2022? So we factor that in when we're making negotiations. I would like to rest my submission at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman of the Salaries and Wages Commission. The next intervention will come from Benjamin Anthony, who is the chair of the negotiating council and auditor of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Comrade Anthony.
Thank you. It is difficult when you have the gurus speak before you in the panel like this. Thank you very much. To me, diversity of this nation is a blessing. It depends on the way we look at it. And the issue of fixing minimum wage as a nation, some of us, it is very important because when you get a fixed wage, that is the minimum for a diversified country like Nigeria. It guides each region and each state on how to go about meeting the salaries and allowances of their workers. But we have problem with the issues of fixing of this wage or minimum wage. When you look at though some of us were no workers in 1981, when you look at it vis-a-vis the exchange rate as at then and now. And another issue is the indices that are being used in fixing of the wage. when we look at like the 2019 minimum wage, when it came out, some of us asked such questions. How much was rent, healthcare, the transport for the worker to and fro, how much will be his lunch and other expenses in the office. And so it becomes so difficult. And we also see that a lot of people or governors were shouting that they can't meet up the minimum wage. But actually, it is very, very good that we continue to stick onto fixing the wage at the center, so that it will guide other sectors, including the private sector. And actually, I agree with what the private sector's sector is doing, because reviewing of salaries is different from wage fixing. And as we are today, or as we see today, the economy realities on ground, if we have, like in the public sector, from time to time to review our pay, we have looked at what is it today. Let's look at how much is a bag of rice and other things. Is it up to, can the family of 4 fit on 30,000, or family of 2, let's say, throughout the month? So actually, we're in support of fixing the wage from the center. And the chairman is talking about monitoring and implementation. And actually, we at the Joint Council also back them up on that, because a lot of states, the Federation, look at it, the issue of implementing the minimum wage is a problem. Some just sign a law or the agreement to implement the wage. So I think it's very important that the review or the analysis or evaluation of the performance of the minimum wage is out, so that wherever we can come in. So the wage issue, actually, so many, we were in Japan, for example, and we asked them, how do you deal with your issues of wages to avoid everyday strikes? They told us that they meet they meet once in a year in April to look at their wage issues. And then we asked them, okay, you have private sectors, mostly private sectors there. They say yes, once they fix the minimum wage, the private sector will go back to negotiate. They are provincial, which is like regions, also go back and renegotiate for the public sector to see where they will meet or where they will stop. And there was something that we also learned there. We have never had it, that wages can be reviewed downward. They said that their wages can be reviewed downward based on their economic performance. But they told us that their government is sincere, that whatsoever happens, they bring everything to the table and they will look at it. And if need be for them to review downward, they will, and if need be, they review upward. So it's very, very important, and I believe we'll continue to stick onto Convention 131 as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Anthony. I'm not quite sure what the audience is applauding you for. Whether it's enjoying our attention to part of what you learned in Japan. And you can also review the wage. You can also review the wage. But the other day proviso, the government is here, bring everything to the table, and so on and so forth. If you try it in some other jurisdictions, that would be the end of work. All right, thanks a lot, Comrade Benjamin Anthony. Let me now respectfully invite Honorable Justice Benedict Kanyip, President of the National Industrial Court of Nigeria. Earlier, of course, we did say that his opus was an eye-opener for this two-day policy forum, and of course, he may wish to either summarize it, key aspects, or again, elaborate on the issues that he had earlier presented. My Lord.
Thank you, moderator. Actually, I want to talk on some inherent contradictions which were not necessarily reflected even in the keynote address. What kind of economic system are we operating in Nigeria? If you go to the Constitution, it talks about key sectors of the economy being managed by government. What does that tell us? That when it comes to economic management, the government has a major say. And if government has a major say, are we operating a planned, regulated economy? Are we operating one that they say is privatization or whatever? It gives us dilemmas that we cannot answer. What kind of development are we pursuing? We sometimes look at, I said something about cost of living crisis. Sometimes I sit down and I ask myself, that 1,500 naira that I buy airtime, and I call a number abroad, I can talk for a number of minutes. I travel abroad, I change that 1,500 to the local currency there, and I call Nigeria and I don't get half the airtime I got with 1,500 from Nigeria. Does it mean we exaggerate the value of the naira in terms of it falling? Because each time we talk about cost of living in Nigeria, the first tendency is to relate it to dollar. Now, we complain about dollarization of the economy, and I remember vividly in 1996, it was a Supreme Court decision that gave credence. I don't know how many of us here are used to our tax laws. We are all taxpayers, but I don't know how many of us are used to the laws. In that time, what happened was, within the oil industry, there was a memorandum of understanding that said taxation will be in the currency of transaction. So the matter went to court and got up to the Supreme Court. And what did we have? The Supreme Court legalized taxation in other than naira. If you go to the tax laws, for instance, tax is supposed to be a certain number of kobo in the naira or a certain percentage in the naira, which means tax ought to be in naira, because naira is our index for political sovereignty. But Supreme Court here now said a memorandum of understanding that says taxation is in the naira, is in the currency of transaction, was valid, which means we have elevated a memorandum of understanding over and above statutory provisions. Immediately after that Supreme Court decision, companies' income tax, petroleum income tax were amended to make taxation in the currency of transaction. Then we wonder why a landlord will take rent in dollar. Why am I raising this? The value of the naira, what it buys for you, is certainly not the same when you change it to dollar and want to buy the same thing. So, is there something wrong somewhere? Secondly, we talked about federalism, and the moderator actually started off by saying something about true federalism. There's nothing like true federalism in the world. Each federal structure or political system in the world has its own brand. Now, labor, minimum wage, industrial relations, arbitration is exclusively in the legislative list. There is this talk about, no, we need to do federalism, let states do their own thing, you must liberalize, remove that bit about section item 34, and so on. We forget Nigeria is a member of the ILO. And as a member of the ILO, it is responsible in certain things. Labor standards, whether we are doing minimum wage or not, and so on. By the time you liberalize this thing to the states, are we going to be in a position to answer to ILO when the queries come? These are issues we may need to look into. But aside from that, if we operate a federal structure, I think what we are supposed to be discussing is lawmaking when it comes to minimum wage, wage fixing, and so on. When we translate these things to the states, do we really understand what it entails, and are we ready for the fallouts? I like to tell people that be careful what you ask for. There's usually what is called law of unintended consequences. If we insist on, in quotes, true federalism, then we have no basis for saying that two people who work differently, do the same kind of work, should earn the same salary. We have no business saying that two doctors, one working for one state, state A, the other working for state B, must collect the same salary. We have no business saying one who works in University A must collect the same salary in University B. So some of these contradictions need to be sorted out first. And for me, as a lawyer, a judge, the contradictions stem from the Constitution itself. You have a Constitution that gives major economic activities to government, and yet we are talking about liberalization. It reminds me of something some years back when Rivers and Lagos were doing the light rail. The question arose whether it was the president who will give them permission to do the rails or not. And I remembered asking a friend to carry the Railway Act and read it. What we found was that only the management board of the railway corporation could grant that kind of permission, not even the president of the country. But at that material time, there was no railway management board because the railways were down. So, if you want to run a liberalized economic system with laws that were made following the constitutional dispensation that says, no, we should have a regulated system, how are you going to cope? Because for me as a judge, when the matter comes to me, I'm going to look at just the letters of the law. And it is what the law says there I'm going to do. And that's why sometimes, derogatorily, they say the law is an ass. But the point remains that if we don't fix some of these contradictions, if we don't sort out the context in which we are discussing some of these issues, we will always remain the talking avenue. We talk. Once the basic structure is not sorted out, it's going to be very difficult for us to say at any given point in time that this is the progress we are making.
All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Justice Kanye, for your intervention. And just before we get comments and questions from the audience, let me redirect our attention to the topic for this technical session. so that we don't conflate issues. Making and implementing national wage laws in the context of Nigeria's diversity and federal system. I know that there have been copious references to the national minimum wage, but hidden in the national minimum wage from our national experience are those consequential adjustments that ultimately have a ripple effect on the rest of the economy. And some persons would argue further that sometimes when these consequential adjustments are made, you also have distortions to the macroeconomic environment that the government then struggles to sort out. I understand his lordship would like to say something.
Let me just stress a point. The national minimum wage actually makes no provision for those consequential adjustments. That's the sad part. It only provides a minimum wage that you shouldn't go below. What happens above the minimum wage? It is silent. So the starting point must be to go back to the same national minimum wage law and then make provisions not just for minimum wage, but for how consequential adjustments are to be made. I remember having that problem when the only case came to me. And because the law was silent, I remember vividly, I'm not too sure at that time, the third alteration was passed, because under the third alteration, we have permission to apply international best practices. So we can always hide under what others are doing, but it depends on whether the lawyers themselves bring them up, because as judges, we can't go into the arena. It is what you raise before us that we can decide based on what you argue. We hardly can go outside your arguments. So when you take the national minimum wage itself, that is silent on consequential adjustments, you have a major point of crisis. And that is why at every point in time when there are disagreements as to national minimum wage and so on, it's never the figure really that is minimum. It's always about the consequential increases that need to be made. The chairman of the Salaries and Wages Commission has already drawn attention to how they deal with it. But the point is they are doing it not necessarily because of the National Minimum Wage Act, but most likely simply because certain things require themselves to be done.
All right, again, thank you very much for that intervention. But on a legal scale, legal constitutional scale, I would like anyone in the audience as well as the panelists to note the point I'm going to make. Namely, we recognize that the fixing of the national minimum wage is on the exclusive legislative list. The same constitution provides economic roles for the three tiers of government: federal, state, and local government. If you were to look, for instance, at the fourth schedule to the Constitution, you will see the functions of local governments. You'll also see the functions of state governments and how they are supposed to interact. Why would it be that it is a National Assembly solely on the basis of the exclusive list that will fix the national minimum wage, when the consequences will be felt by one or three tiers of government, and secondly, also by the private sector? What is the voice of these other stakeholders in the fixing of the national minimum wage? As I said, when there are consequences to be felt by all, does that explain why, for instance, the National Minimum Wage Act is passed, and state governments, a good number of them, are incapable or otherwise reluctant in enforcing the provisions of the law? Will it be necessary, therefore, for the subnational entities and other stakeholders? I know somebody can make reference to the procedures and proceedings at the National Assembly, public hearing, and so on and so forth. They take all of those views into consideration, but at the end of the day, who votes? States are also supposed to manage their economies. What voice do they have in fixing the minimum wage? Having a voice also means having a vote at the material time. Can we draw an analogy, for instance, from what happens? We're seeking to amend the Constitution for a fifth time, And the process of constitutional amendment required that the National Assembly would first pass the bill and circulate it to the 36 state houses of assembly. And you will require returns of 75% of these 36 states, namely 24 states, for that particular bill, accepted to by the president, to become an amendment to the Constitution. Because the impact is rippling throughout the entire system. Why will it be therefore in seeking to manage the economy? And we do know that states and local governments are also independent or interdependent centers in managing the national minimum wage or economic consequences. They don't appear to have a voice. On that note, I'd like to invite comments and questions. Kindly signify by raising your hand. We will take...
Let me just make an
quick information.
Exactly.
All right, very quickly.
Hello, just hold on. Sorry, you will see that as we are making that submission, I was also on the sideline conferring with NECA. In the determination of national minimum wage is a tripartite arrangement. First, which means the federal government is there, the state governments are there, the business sector is there, NASIMA, NECA, and all of those components. Because in any case, you can't shake people's head in their absence. But I think the fear raised by the Honorable Justice is clear. But I don't want to, if I want to speak from the depth of my heart, some people will say my language is unquote. But about what is going on at the level of the states and the way people are not regarded and valued at all. Go and check, and the records are there. And I will mention one state, just for example, Abia. The minimum wage is yet to be implemented. Salaries are owed across all the sectors, some 20 months, some 11 months. What do you expect of that work? And something just came to my mind as we were talking about that. I recall, during the military rule, between 1984 and 1990, there was a wage freeze policy, which was like holding people and tying their hands and their leg, making people work like slaves. But what happened in the private sector? Because you are not going to get anything out of people if they are hungry. You are not going to get anything out of people if they cannot transport to work. Unions in the private sector were having discussion, even when there was a national, because the law was stupid. When there was a national law to say people shouldn't discuss, employers and workers were discussing. They were improving campaigns. They were providing vehicles to take people to work. They were providing certain allowances outside of the ban of law. So I don't think I needed to make that clarification.
Okay, thank you very much. The chairman of the Salaries and Wages Commission would like to... Oh, it's the same point you wanted to raise. Fine. They've made their comments, and I'm sure you've also listened to them. But the crucial point that I raised, that's in my opinion, namely, what is the voice at the material time of voting? State governments are represented, that's the executive branch. Is it the legislature that participates in it? The legislature also has a role in appropriation at the state level. So, back to the audience, kindly signify by raising your hand. We'll take a set of four. We'll take four comments. Kindly identify yourself. We will give you numbers in the meantime. ASU President, 1. The gentleman at the back, 2. The gentleman in black here, 3. And then the gentleman there, 4. Please, in making your intervention, be short and sharp.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and my lord and distinguished panelists. I have a few questions to bring up so we can think about it. I'm looking at what we put up there. It says resolving dilemmas, reinforcing milestones. There are quite some dilemmas that NSIWC, as an organization, as a commission, we have. And I'm sure Michael Modu has the same thing. We're talking about a minimum national wages. Should it be minimum national wages? I had my lord and my chairman said something about it. Should it be geopolitically, zoned? When you look at America, as he rightly said, Not every state earns the same thing. Our earning power, the purchasing power of states in Nigeria, is it the same thing? Is it the same thing in Kaduna and Lagos State? Is it the same thing in Ekiti State and what you have in Abia? These are things that has to be considered. We are talking about the National Assembly. What about the government? I remember when the minimum wage came on board, some governments cannot afford it. They claim there was no money to pay for it. These are some dilemmas we really have to think about as a nation. Is that a way forward? Are we going to think about the subnationals? What is the influence? What is the part that they will be playing in making decisions about national salaries, minimum income wages? And beyond the minimum salaries, we have to think about the consequential adjustment that the chairman was talking about. We have issues with doctors, judges, MPA workers, lecturers, professors. Are we going to consider the skills? Is it the IT? Is it how scarce the skills is? Is it how difficult it is to get to where you are? What are we considering? Because those are the things we really have to put in the open for national discussion. That when we are really thinking about it, how do we set up these salaries? Is this commensurate? Why we are doctors? Why are they going to UK? Why are they living in this country? Why is everybody jackpotting or whatever?
All right, thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you. ASU President, then the gentleman in beige, that will be number 2. Gentleman in black, sorry, I don't know your name, so forget if I say gentleman in black, and the gentleman behind there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Please, short and sharp.
Thank President. I think on the issue of the minimum wage, it's not an issue. It's a minimum set at the national, that no state should go below. But state are willing to give 1 million. So if it's want to make, at least don't go below the national minimum. That's the idea. On this video, should see. I also found out that the problem we actually have a minimum wage, or whatever we call it, including salary like that, we don't use any yardstick, any parameter to determine what should be a minimum wage or what people should earn. And that's our problem. 30,000 naira a month is a most of rent per day for a family of 6. Transport is not there, housing is not there. Where did you arrive at the 30? Those are the things that should create what. But let's look at it. Let's look at it the other way. It's a class issue we are seeing about salary, whether we like it or not. It's a class issue. I'll give you an example. A Nigerian worker gets 30,000 a month. It doesn't bother the system. The classic rule, the top class, gets 17,000. People at the top level, director and their level, get that 17,000 naira per night at DTA. 17,000 per night at DTA. We say it's too small. We doubled it without any struggle. The nation doubled it, no struggle. No raise an issue, but we doubled because they use it. They travel every day, travel abroad, travel over. They doubled it. But that worker, they forgot him. Because that worker, the other people like us, they don't travel, you travel at your own cost. But the big men, you increase your own. That is one too. Let me give another example. The revenue mobilization will be here. They say they want to increase the political office holders. Let's look at it. When I stumbled into the salary structure of Nigeria's senior political office holders, and I saw an allowance called hardship allowance. Hardship allowance. This amount, you have a free car, a free office, a free food, your own island are free. You have hardship allowance. But the driver that comes from Babaleda every morning by 5 to come and pick you, finish with you and take you back, and then drop your house by 1 and look for how to go to the village to stay does not have hardship allowance. That is where we have insecurity. We have to, like somebody said, we have to decentralize these things. Nigeria belongs to all of us. Like the MSC man said, the workers produce the resources, but the top 5%. Just imagine how many times do a typical government travel abroad every year? I looked at a travel by one government, you spend 17 million on one trip. How many times do they travel abroad? How many times do commissioner, minister travel abroad every year? How much does it cost? How many times can that driver travel to his village in a year? Those are questions we should ask. When we are determining minimum wage, we should use a look at proper indices like we do. And that's how we finish negotiations with government using all the indices. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And then salary income and wage commission, just start and say, take it or leave it, take 12% increase or take it. Thank you. Number two.
Thank you. My name is Comrade Nashi Michael. I'm a nurse, the president, National Association of Nigerian Nurses and Midwives. What we are talking here is national minimum wage. And I have a concern, and the concern is this. We buy from the same market. Fuel in any state, in Abuja, anywhere, the same car uses it. And any other commodities. And when you fix the national minimum wage, it's expected that some states will go and negotiate. Negotiate for what? After negotiating, you negotiate for prices of commodities. And it is obvious that some governors have refused to pay salaries. How do workers survive? So the concern is whatever decision that will be taken in an attempt to fix national minimum wage, let it be remembered that we have the same market where everybody goes for similar commodities that compete with one another. So how do we reconcile the issue of the worker in Abuja, the worker in Abia, the worker in Imo, the worker in Anambra, in Ebonyi, and so on and so forth. So that whatever decision we are going to take, it will be a fair decision that will actually be able to address the needs of the workers. Today, as we speak, we are talking about inflation. Inflation does not respect anybody, whether you are a politician or what. It does not respect anybody. Dollar exchange is there. It does not respect anybody. If you go to buy vegetable, the prices have changed, rise everything. So the concern is, how do we reconcile the fixing of the national minimum wage and an average worker in other states and national? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Number three.
Thank you, moderator. I am Dr. Clinton Ebitibo, representing the Nigerian of Teachers NUT. And you will permit me to directly speak to our Honorable Justice, particularly reference to the presentation that was made, the keynote that was made in the morning. I say this because I come from, of course, a constituency where when you talk about gaps in the management practices in the country, compensation management practices in the country, teachers are at the receiving end. And I have to take note of something very important that was stated in the morning, and that has to do with the no work, no pay. And let me bring it back to what of course, is happening in our system. Today we are talking about national minimum wage. For me, that is not arguable because it has been overstressed. We are all citizens of Nigeria. The market is the same. The price of fuel is the same. And so on and so forth. Of course, the value of Naira, is the value of Naira different in Abia State from Abuja. So that minimum, of course, is meant to guide. So any other difference, it's upward. And it is happening, particularly in the teaching profession. Many states, teachers are not paid the same amount. That's the truth. But sir, what I'm going is this. Now we have a scenario where the federal government has that responsibility of setting standards. Now we are talking about setting a standard by way of minimum wage, a national assembly act of parliament. Here we have state governments that have reneged, refusing to implement. There are states. Bayelsa is my state, that's where I come from, sorry to say it. And many other states at the primary level, the primary school teachers have not been paid the minimum wage. The point is, these people have been denied their salaries. If it happens now, at the point that now these teachers are forced to go on strike, we will now say, even the little that they are receiving, somebody has faulted not being able to implement an act of parliament is scot-free. Nothing happens to that person. Then the one that now says, give me my right, how come, pay me this. In an attempt to get this, to call the attention of government, to draw their own attention, we go on strike. For going on strike, and even the half that is paid you that you will not receive again. Is that no work, no salary free law? Is it fair to, of course, the workers? And if it is not, what happens to those who are actually also offending the law of the land, the act of parliament that's not being implemented? That is my concern.
Right, thank you. Number 4, there's a gentleman behind you, please.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Aboka Ambusa. I'm from Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. My question is on the 5-year minimum review period of the Minimum Wage Act. Is it when it is signed or as it is signed, or is it when it is implemented? This is because, as many speakers have spoken, it is not the same time implementation comes. Some of us are government agencies, but we self-fund ourselves. So because of that issue, even when this Minimum Wage Act is implemented, we also run into a lot of dilemma that you have just mentioned here, and we want you to take us into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments and interventions. I imagine there will be others who will ask questions, but let's get the panelists to respond to the concerns and issues that have been raised thus far. Let's begin with the DG of NECA.
Well, I think the theme of the program is well thought out, because there are so many dilemmas that we've noted now, and also many milestones. I think fundamentally, as my Lord have said, I think the issue we have, from my perspective, is basically the contradictions that we've created for ourselves. Now, those contradictions are not forced on us by nature. They are contradictions that are inherent in us, and we feed on those contradictions. First, the minimum wage, as has been explained, it's not salary fixed, as it were. It's just the minimum below which nobody should pay. So if through an act of mischief we are interpreting, or for convenience, some persons are interpreting that concept to be that is what we are supposed to pay, then it is wrong. Because even in the private sector, hardly will you find a company that is paying 30 as minimum wage, because progressively on a year basis or 2 years basis, we negotiate with the unions, and then salaries are increased progressively. Now, one of the other issues that are inherent, contradictions, and one of the challenges that I also think we should deal with is even the National Minimum Wage Committee itself. We think it is not right for the committee to meet every 5 years. Once the fixing of minimum wage is done, then everybody went back to sleep. Then once another 5 years, then we reconvene. We think the committee should subsist in such a way that those inherent challenges that will arise during the implementation, like this issue of consequential adjustments, I think those are issues that the committee can sit and agree on. Since all parties, government, federal government represented by the Secretary to the federal government was part of the committee, 6 governors were part of the committee, the private sector, in fact, it was tripartite plus, labor, employers, and government, plus so many other professional bodies that are stakeholders within the context of wage. So I think, or we think strongly, that the committee should not just go back to sleep after fixing every issue that will arise. The way they sat to agree, they should also sit consistently, maybe once or twice a year, to also look at those issues of consequential adjustment and then they deal with it. And lastly, moderator, please. The issue you raised about salaries being increased, being reduced, I think it's not about edging those salaries against inflation. So through social dialogue, in some clients like Argentina, Singapore, they have a system where the social partners have sat down and agreed that once there is inflation, salaries automatically edge against inflation. Once inflation is reducing, the salary naturally comes down through the mechanism of social dialogue and the process they've set for themselves. And this is fostered seriously by issue of transparency. Without transparency, we continue to interpret those terms to our own benefit and to the disadvantage of many other persons. Thank you.
Thank you. Comrade Bello.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. I think nature itself was like you. I heard the Honorable Justice speak about the judiciary and that the wages in that sector has not been reviewed since 2008, 2009. And then you have an opportunity of a minimum wage, and you think the people in that sector will go and sleep. They will not explore every opportunity through consequential adjustment to at least make life a little meaningful for themselves. So things are wrong about the way people's wages are reviewed to reflect the reality of the economy. If you check sometimes, even when you improve wages, take for instance, minimum wage of 30,000 since 2019, and check around the world, every country is responding to the crisis of COVID, the crisis of Ukraine, Russia war, and the attendant inflationary pressures that it has. What have we done? Nothing. And so you think tomorrow we have an opportunity as workers, we will not be able to exploit. And let me also tell you, I think it's a malady that is prevalent in the public service. We need to rethink the entire bargaining structure and how we harmonize. Again, another crisis is also the disparity in the different MDAs and the departments, because there is no structured wages. Of course, there should be. Take private sector, for instance, oil and gas sector, they pay far better than manufacturing will pay. But it's determined by the parties in that sector. So there is the benefit already of bargaining. But what is critical that will make bargaining also meaningful is how we use the social dialogue mechanism to address macroeconomic issues and to ensure that the way we address it also fits into the bargaining system.
Right. Thank you very much, Comrade Bello. Somebody once said that sometimes we should be wary of comparative discussions. Yes, when COVID arrived, again against the backdrop of the Ukraine-Russian war, we have seen the interventions in the economies and the lives of citizens in Europe and also in the United Kingdom. But you also have to look at their savings base. Savings base. How many of those countries are borrowing heavily for consumption? My Lord.
There was a direct question to me on no work, no pay. Let me start with that one. What's the position of ILO on no work, no pay? ILO jurisprudence is very simple. The rule is no work, no pay. That's ILO. So if Nigeria says no work, no pay, remember that the supervisory international body also acknowledges that no work, no pay. In the keynote address, I cited one or two cases where the NIC had opportunity to interpret that rule. But you must understand it in the context in which it was presented. One of them had to do with Oyo State government. The state workers had gone on strike for months. In the agreement they signed to come back to work, the state government agreed that they were going to pay even for the strike period. When the workers resumed, Oyo State government now came to NIC and said, that agreement we entered to pay for strike period, declared illegal. And we said, no, the agreement acquires a life of its own. If you look at the jurisdiction of NIC, we have jurisdiction over the interpretation of a collective agreement or memorandum of understanding for the settlement of a trade dispute. So if you enter into an agreement with workers that you are going to pay for strike period, you must honor it because it acquires a status, a validity in its own right. Those of you who are familiar with strike jurisprudence, Internationally, unions are expected to have what is called strike funds. So that during the period of strike, it's from the strike fund you are going to augment for those who are on strike so that they can sustain the strike. But I don't think there's a union in Nigeria that has that strike fund. So sometimes some of these things, you need to also look at it, and that's why I said something about looking at some of these things in context, because you can't run away from it. We in NIC, for instance, with our jurisdiction to apply international best practices, when this kind of problem comes, naturally we expect, and which is a major problem we are having, very often when these problems come, the lawyers that the parties hire are lawyers who know little or nothing about even what we are doing, who know little or nothing about modern day labor jurisprudence. They keep taking us to the old days of common law, despite the constitutional provisions that say, one, we have jurisdiction to apply international best practice, two, we have jurisdiction over unfair labor practices. But when you hire a lawyer who does not know his left from right, for God's sake, what are you expecting? I have listened to lawyers on television espouse what they call labor law, and I laugh. That's why I have personally suggested that immunity lawyers enjoy in court should be abolished, so that some litigants can sue them. I have personally suggested it. If what I see daily in court is anything to write home, litigants should begin to sue their lawyers because they are doing a great disservice. I've had cause to ask a lawyer in court, if you don't know an area of law, must you collect the brief? I've had cause to ask that in open court. Sometimes we do these things and hurt those we are giving service to. Incidentally, my doctoral research was on consumer protection, not even labor law. So I know what it means to talk about law relating to economically disadvantaged people. I understand it better than any other person in Nigeria can afford to say that. But the point is that as a judge, you are circumscribed. It's garbage in, garbage out. If you bring nonsense to court, you are going to get rubbish.
As your lordship pleases. All right. Thank you very much. We really are privileged, as it were, to have the presence, the continuing presence of Honorable Justice Benedict at this forum. There's no question about that. He knows, you can see the tips and hints that has been given at this interactive session. The next response will come from the chairman of the Salaries and Incomes and Wages Commission, but I would like him to take along this perspective. I know that probably one or two persons would like to raise their hands and ask, but we're getting pressed for time. The point has been touched on briefly by Comrade Bello, and then a gentleman, the number two commentator, did say, look, we all go to the same market. Wage laws, I advised earlier, let's shift from minimum wage. Let's forget that adjective, that adjective noun of minimum national wage. Let's focus on wage laws. Salaries and Wages Commission is created by law. But we also understand in this economy today that you have probably a dozen different salary structures. Different salary structures. And various sectors will have to go to the Salaries and Incomes and Wages Commission to make a pitch for the peculiarities of their sector. And they get granted this salary structure. On Good Morning Nigeria, raised this issue with the Honorable Minister of Finance, raised the issue with the Honorable Minister of Labor and Employment. And they said that the federal government had set up a committee to harmonize these disparate wage structures. And some of them are so scandalously high that those who work in line ministries feel obviously disadvantaged, and yet they go to the same market. It has also created, some would say, some social pressures, So you and I, because there's nobody here who makes minimum wage, let's be frank about that. You would want your child or your ward to go to that sector in a government setup where the pay is a lot higher. So everybody is driving to CBN, everybody is driving to NNPC, everybody is driving. How did we come about these disparate salary structures? And how can we, in the context of our federal system, because Johansson was talking a while ago, you negotiate salaries for doctors, for nurses, XYZ, state governments are incapacitated even in paying, which brings us back to the whole issue of where is the voice of the subnational entities in these arrangements. Mr. Chairman, sir.
Thank you very much. I think I will start with the very last issue you've raised. The early acts that set up various organizations and parastatals gave those parastatals the powers for their boards to pay the salaries that they would like to pay. In most cases based on ability to pay, because they are also generating that income. And if you look at recent acts setting up organizations, some of those powers have now been abridged. It now states that the board of XYZ Corporation can fix their salaries subject to NSIWC intervention. We are in the course of trying to amend our act to bring those organizations within the new process that we are talking about. Because the SGF had issued 2 circulars stating that no agency should increase salaries or allowances without clearance from NSIWC. But you see, you cannot override an act with a circular. That's the truth. Let me also address the issue that was raised, lest it becomes taken for the truth. The Salaries Commission does not approve salaries. If you go to our act, it's very clear. We only recommend, after carrying out salary inspections and coming to your organization to look at what you're doing. Sometimes we do job evaluation and grading. It is only on that basis that we will now recommend to government. And when you have collective bargaining, what the Salaries and Wages Commission Act says, you must deposit 3 copies of your agreement with us to make comments and recommend to government. We don't review anybody's salaries. So it's a bit strange to hear that an agreement had been made and Salaries and Wages Commission reviewed that agreement. No, we never did any such thing. As a matter of fact, what we've always done is that if you want to review your salary in a ministry, for example, the first thing you should attach is the staff statistics. How many are you in that organization? So that we now multiply and see the total cost implication. But quite a number of persons would arrive at what salaries they think they should earn. And if they are going to generate those monies, I don't really have much of a problem. But if the money is going to come from the federal treasury, my responsibility is to advise the federal government that if you are offering this quantum multiplied by this number of persons in this organization, this is what the cost implication will be. That's my function. And if you want to readjust the parity between you and already existing professions within that group. We do not want to start all over again. So we would also intervene and give that advice. NSIWC, if anybody is telling you that NSIWC approves salaries or allowances, I'm here to tell you that that's not true. And there's no other person in this room that will tell you that truth, because that's where I work and that's where I chair. When we look at the DTA that has been spoken about now, I personally have been very concerned that from 2008, then I served in ICPC. Why would you give a driver 5,000 naira as night allowance? What you're trying to do is to tell the man to sleep in the car. And the boss, if he does not intervene personally, is a foolish boss, because that guy, if he sleeps in the car, is most likely to sleep on the wheel and drive you under a trailer unconsciously. So I've been in the forefront of us trying to have a review, and we made our recommendations. And they did not select any group of persons in the public service to NX. It was a general review. The drivers, which was the least, was also increased. Like every other person's salary allowance, DTA was increased. I have traveled to the same hotel in Vienna for 11 years, and they have not added $1. So I know exactly how much I will pay for that place. But take any hotel in this country and find out if any that you used to pay 10,000 is not collecting 30,000 today, minimum. In fact, when we announced the DTA increase, a journalist came to me, called me that he wanted to come and do an interview. Why would we fix so amount? And I said, I'm very sorry. As you are coming, please could you branch by Hilton and a few other places and get their tariffs so that we can discuss. He called me from one of those places and said, are these people crazy? Can you imagine the kind of amounts that they're fixing here? And let me tell you the consequences of what we were doing in 2008 as civil servants. Since you cannot generate enough money legitimately for your DTA to get a good room, a job that would have taken you 2 days to do, you will now put 4 days or 5 days. So we had also built into the system dishonesty by not doing the right things. And so these things are gradual, they have to be fixed. But in fixing it, we should not be alarmist about those processes. The issue that was also raised about not having any standards in determining national minimum wage is not correct. Because very eminent persons, different sectors and backgrounds were members of that committee. And that report is not classified. As a matter of fact, nobody. I have those copies in the commission. Nobody has ever come to ask for a copy. They are available. We've come with our publications out of this document. We must also begin to interrogate government by asking government publications so that you can challenge those reports. NSIWC will carry out income survey. We did an income survey of private medical institutions and bodies to find out the private sector personnel earning more than the adolescent in the public sector. It was the reverse that we got. So sometimes when we're working on these things, we have minimum standards. If I look at the university system, NUC sets minimum standards for all universities, whether you are federal or state or private. NUC. We cannot come here, for example, to say NUC does not know what they are doing, because they cannot access it or access for everybody. No, that's not the process that we use. NAFDAC is setting standards across enforcement of drugs and food. My problem in the union sector is that they are not doing enough to challenge in court some of the perceived wrongs that they are very passionate about. The national minimum wage, the only state where we have had a challenge is in Bauchi State, has taken the Bauchi State government to court for non-implementation, and we are there. We've decided to be fully centered, and I want to see whether that state government would claim they are paying, because they are paying. It was very clear what will happen if you are not paying. So we should need to do this. I'm just giving this by the way of information. I'm not taking.
No, it's pretty useful. It's pretty useful. So that the more information we have, better informed we are. So asking questions, making comments, advocacy, it's a lot easier. Comrade Anthony, we are pressed for time. I was going to exclude you, but that would be unfair.
Well, thank you. See the issue of salary, talking. In Nigeria, I would say that there's no social justice whatsoever. The issue of justice. Once somebody have clamored, they have forgotten those downstairs, and remove the ladder. So when you look at it, a graduate go to any place, and is earning 1 million. Well, a director, they have served for 30 years. So we need redistribution of this wealth. Let's look at it. And I think the salaries and wages, if God help us, they review their. I think they can this issue and do redistribution of the Nigerian wealth, including those who they say they want to increase their just of recent. Because actually, if you look at down the drivers and others, look at the energy they are putting into the work, and they go home nothing. So I think you help us issue and look at it very well. And secondly, Nigeria, we are having the issue of transparency. We are not running open, including the trade union, open government. If we are transparent, if you are in hardship, people will know that yes, it's a problem. And the issue of borrowing. Yes. What we do here, we make so much noise to borrow money, and at the end of the day, we never finish Ibadan to Lagos expressway for 8 years. So we have a problem with transparency, issue of justice. Except come back, all of us look at our laws and ensure that we look at the salary somewhere when in part of Africa. What the salaries and wages is that they say okay, your basic salary is 30,000, but But you are housing. They set a standard. Even the MDs there. You are housing more than the percentage on percentage. So at least they can bridge the gap between we that are federal ministry and those working in and other organizations.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Comrade. I'd like to thank the audience for your audience kind of well over the time budgeted for this. We know that there are seven other technical sessions the organizers are contemplating some merging some because of the related issues. On that note, I'd like to thank the panelists. But to all of us, let me invite one convener of this session, who is National Full-Time Commissioner in charge of compensation, to thank us very briefly, so that we can all sign off on the session.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, sir. My Lord, has been wonderful and listening to all this. To the great panelists, I appreciate you, Mr. Moderator, you're well appreciated, my chairman, and to the great audience that we have, we appreciate. Please stay tuned, because we have more interesting discussions to come. I'm saying it as stay tuned. Later, delve into compensation issues. All these dilemmas, so by the time we all become it's been done by the federal government, by NSIWC, by Thank you. Enjoy your lunch. I believe you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. More sessions to go. We're not leaving yet, right?
All right, thank you very much. We're going for lunch right now. We're going for lunch right now. We'll just take the next couple of sessions. I'll have some very brilliant speakers who come up to address some very important issues in line with our theme of forum. And very first, I'd like to very respectfully invite to speak on conceptual and theoretical perspective on reward system issues and legal policies, practice frameworks on compensation, analysis of current situation on compensation in Nigeria. I'd like to call on Professor of Industrial Relations, Professor David Togo. Please speak to us very Please come up to go to the front row here, to the final seat here. And next I'll call on Barrister Malaki Hukumadu, who also be speaking to us on the same topic area. Please come up here to sit here. Country Director, ILO, Abuja, who is not here at the moment, I would like to call on Executive Director, Amnesty International Nigeria, Amnesty International Nigeria, Dr. Osai, please have your seat at the panel area here. Mohamed Bashman, representative of American International Labor Solidarity Abuja office. Please do us the honor of the side of the presentation. Is a representative of the RAMFAC here? RAMFAC, we understand the representative here at this point. Okay, move on. Director General NECA. Director General NECA will also be speaking to us. Is the representative of the president of NLC here? Comrade Bello is here. Please come and join us at the side of the hall. Any representative of the president of the TUC? The Director of Human Rights Commission was here earlier. Understand the representative is here at this hall. If the representative is here, please join. Good. Our seats are getting full. So. Okay, I guess we're done those on the side of the side. So I would like to share persons of this session. Now note in your program there are a couple of three sessions. But for want of time, we have to gather these together. So I'll call on the chairperson of one of the sessions, Dr. Mrs. Jana Famo. Please come up, please join. Good. Thank you very much. A round of applause to her. Alright, so another session, Professor Onifai, who is also the chairman of one of the session, joining those at the side of the point. Is the professor of workplace relations, University of Ibadan. Good. So they will give a couple of presentations as much as possible, very brief, to the point. 7 minutes, so we can round this session very quickly and go for lunch, because lunch is getting cold. So we'll at this point hand over to Mrs. Christiana. Please take it up from here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience and endurance. We've come to talk about the nitty-gritty of compensation management, and we're very honored privileged to have this crop of knowledgeable people and practitioners here who just go straight to the point. And let me just throw in the first out about the key issue in compensation management. I hope that I want to provoke our thoughts on the beginning of compensation management. Job evaluation. Key issue. And compensation management begs the question of a practicable scheme, modern career management. So this is where that's why we are going around this circle. I know that some of us will address this issue. There is need for comprehensive job evaluation since we haven't had one. And everybody has escaped universal salary. Why are they escaped? There is no basis for them to I'm sure that some of the issues will come up, and I want to provoke our thoughts by looking at that. There's need for us establish comparability and analyze compensable factors in employment jobs. Have a fair basis. Don't just drop on the start. To have equitable compensation. Thank you very much. You are welcome once again. I think we should just this order.
Chairperson, just to guide us what we have done now is to consolidate three sessions. Okay. And these are presentations, not panel discussion. So they make presentations. No more than 7 minutes. They speak. The issues they've been invited, and then especially perspective of the organizations, and individual rights. So after that, a round of questions. That's what. So very quickly. Let's invite Dafe Otibo, Emeritus Professor, University of Lagos.
Thank you. I don't think University of Lagos are very to see. Thank you for the honor. My topic, conceptual and theoretical perspectives on the reward system, issues in policy, practice frameworks of compensation. I got headlines. At the end, I will throw out some questions for us to look over. Now, what is reward system? Employee reward system or employee recognition system is a set of guidelines and processes that an organization uses to assess employee performance and provide rewards accordingly. And why do we need a reward system? One, improve employee motivation, increase employee satisfaction, encourage employee retention, strengthen organizational culture, help with employee recruitment, and create sense of competition among employees. What aims of reward system management? Employee motivation, employee productivity, employee retention, employee organizational goals alignment, compliance maintenance, ethical status. We run a system to encourage employees to follow procedure so that you don't encourage fraud and corruption. For that, you need to develop an appraisal and reward system, which all organizations need to do with that public or private sector. What are the common types of effective reward systems for employees? One, bonus. Show off familiar with that. Profit sharing in place of private sector. Commission. You can do some commission at the end of the year. Recognition programs when you might employee of the month and give a certificate. Or gift cards like like a piece of paper, a voucher that allows you to buy certain things. Those are usually used more in Europe, more in North America, there are a few companies that do so. You have paid time off, like that, and you get paid. In the private sector, you can tell us of the shares, and profit sharing schemes, then benefits in car allowance, health insurance. So what are the essential features of organizations reward system? Multi-flexible. Point-based, where it's clear to everybody that they are being administering, and clear to everybody what you can do to merit it. What are the trends in Nigeria? For Nigeria, an organization has to be registered or incorporated to offer benefits and pay staff or employees. But depending on type, industry, vocational, and backing facilities, it could take weeks and months to incorporate, employ staff, include them in the payroll, and then they start to work. The common reward items are 13th month bonus, which many companies still quarrel over to today. There's the annual bonus, car allowance, dental benefits, leave allowance, life insurance, maternity leave, meal vouchers, medical insurance, mobile phone, these days of mobile phones, official car, paid sick leave, pension plan and contributions, performance-based bonus, relocation, as we are transferred to another city, relocation allowance, stock options in case of private sector, school fees in some cases, there's still payment of school fees, time off or public holidays, transportation or transport allowance, and workmen's insurance. For public sector over the decades, they've had all kinds of structures and mechanisms. You have the consolidated top public office holder salary structure. You have the consolidated research and allied institution salary structure. You have consolidated tertiary institution salary structure 2. You have the consolidated university academic structure. You have the consolidated medical salary structure. You have the consolidated health salary structure. You have the consolidated judicial salary structure. Now, in terms of practicalities, MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies, and National Salaries and Incomes Wage Commission, and the National Assembly, what exactly are their roles in compensation, determination, and management? There are 19 functions for the National Salary, Incomes, and Wages Commission, which I won't bother to go into. What I would like to draw your attention to, and which I hope we can all comment later, that commission to handle all the issues, and 18 of them, including wage infractions by other agencies. How and what capacities exist there? 2, can the National Assembly determine the reward system, not on salary, the reward system? 3, can the presidency and government determine the reward system? What are the issues concerning all of this? 1, how are salaries and wages in the public sector determined? Determined is the word. 2, who fixes salaries and wages in the public sector? 3, how are differentials in wages and salaries determined in the public sector? One of the speakers earlier had compared the earnings of a director to another category of staff in NNPC. So presumably there should be equalization in compensation by his logic, but we'll all discuss that. How useful are inbuilt yearly salary provisions? How regularly may salaries and wages in the public sector be reviewed? 6. How cost effective is the size of workforce in the public sector? What I've done here is a minefield. How cost effective is the size of the workforce in the public sector? In other words, what determines the number of ministries? What determines the number of agencies? What determines the total number of staff employed by them? How to determine salary for each level in the structure? Why, for example, with revenue mobilization, whatever it is called, be involved in determining and implementing any salary structure in the public sector? The business revenue mobilization, but it's dedicated to ranks of political office holders. Who determines who to be engaged in any ministry, any constitution? In any ministry, any constitution? Can we defend the number of staff employed there? The notion of productivity. I've heard that word used several. Productivity. How do you determine productivity in public sector? You cannot tell in advance next week what's done in how many meetings if you are going to participate. So how exactly to measure productivity in the public sector? Or you rewarded for it, like some people argue. For the bottom line, which MDAs, ministries, departments, agencies, and should be put to the reward system in the public sector? Say cost effective. All talked about ability to pay. We didn't talk about income generation, type of production projects. Somehow, percentage of the oil is stolen and true. What are the main mechanisms and processes for motivating public sector employees? What will be the modalities for comparing and determining public sector compensation levels with those in a diversified private sector operations? There are more questions, but all I'm trying to do is to toss them out. By the time my colleagues over here are done with their specific presentation, then we'll get to the meat of it. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dafe Otobo. The next in line to speak is Barrister Malaki Ugumadu. He's of the Ugumadu Chambers in Lagos. 8 minutes.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And Prof, thank you for taking the lead. Good afternoon. So what I did was to produce, in my view, a very detailed paper on this, but given that
the time is now reducing from the original 10 now to 7. I'll speak to it. My approach was to deal with the abstract of this topic, the introduction, and then the topic itself, analyzing from the point of view of the law in particular, considering that quite a lot has been said to using the words of Mr. Kingsley, covered the field. If you said the field has been covered, then it means we should go home. But I'm standing here. So, wages, rewards, compensation, are they different? Of course they are. And I will not belabor that because enough clarification had occurred with respect to previous presentation. But it bears no further stress if I go ecclesiastically a bit to say that the creator of man himself, God the Almighty, is the first that instituted the issue of wage and warned that no laborer shall go without his or her wage. In short, not being a very good active Christian, but I can recognize about 4 aspects, verses of the Bible where that was expressly stated. Now, why is that important? In my view, it is important because ignoring it naturally distorts the harmony that the society desires for productivity and growth. And we have seen it all across board, all across the world, no less in Nigeria, where the kind of pay disparity that we have all become aware of, including the example given as between the driver and the director, for instance, has been made very clear. In short, what was not said, given the level of insecurity, is that where you continue to pay the driver as miserable as you have decided to do, by keeping him in his vehicle and risking the possibility of driving you, thank you, Chairman, driving you under the train, as presented by the Chairman. The greater danger, which is even easier, no thanks to kidnappers, is that such a person becomes a veritable informant or agent to arrange for your kidnapping. Don't forget, he or she would know or have an idea what you are taking with lesser job. So, at the heart of the whole discussion is how does that worker get sufficiently mobilized, motivated, and encouraged with a view to giving his best and enhancing productivity, which will be effectively and adequately shared across board. So I looked at the trajectory, the historical account and the trajectory of this whole engagement, starting from the first generation workers that faced the kind of reluctance and recalcitrance of the colonial masters. They clearly did not want to tolerate any form of agitation for wage increase. And they did this assuring those early workers that if they persisted, they would not just be mass sacked. They also threatened them with violence. And the records are there. Now, those who, their heirs, those who inherited their legacies, I'm talking of the military, did even worse. At a point, about 19 governors in this country, under the military, collectively agreed, that's the word, that they were going to pay less than national minimum wage. Then there was the Minimum Wage Act, even if it has not been improved upon as it is today. They forgot that by Section 1 of that act, the agreement, like my lordship did say, to pay anything less than that which had been fixed as the minimum wage was not just illegal, it was right. Now, but what is the bigger point? It is that where a people have been subjected to the level where their productivity cannot be guaranteed by reason of how they are treated in the workplace. The tendency is that you continue to multiply and replicate the ripple effect of such demotivated workforce. From there, we arrived at the civil rule, where it was felt that the civilian administrators, unlike the colonial masters and the military hegemony, will fare better. But it is documented that the agitations for living wage became escalated even more under the civil rules put together than we had in the previous kinds of government. That brings me to the legal aspects of this discourse. You know, I combine the legal and the policy frameworks that are relevant to this discussion. And in this respect, I looked at about 6, 7 of these relevant laws. The one, of course, is the national minimum wage, which is now 2019, that repealed the earlier Minimum Wage Act, Cap 61, 2004. This time around, unlike the previous one, it has 18 sections. 18 as against the 10 that we had in the Repeal Act. By Section 2 of that Act, it is no longer under any prevarication that this Act, as we say in law, is of general application. In other words, it is no longer in dispute by Section 2 that this Act and the content thereof is applicable to all states of the Federation. But there is an inherent contradiction that often would arise because, again, we have not clearly, and I'm happy somebody in the previous section did point that out. Sorry, I think it was my Lord, the President of the National Industrial Corporation. It is that even the Constitution that we operate is not as clear as to the applicability of wage, which is an item under item 34 of the second schedule. It's not as clear as that. And I reference the phrase used to say that the national minimum wage for the Federation or any part thereof. This is a bit curious because most state governments, and indeed some recalcitrant employers, have lashed on that to begin to espouse the principles of federalism and say that they are not bound as it were, and that this is a constitutional provision under the schedule to the Constitution, and that it should be optional according to states. Now, that kind of argument cannot go too far for two reasons. The one is that even if you want to push the argument that the principles of federalism, which is a recognition of the juxtaposition of state powers at different tiers of government, is applicable in this instance, you cannot run away from also the notion of the federating unit donating some aspects of what makes them autonomous, including foreign policy, defense, and that minimum wage. We've been schooled about how some democracies, particularly in the United States, have tried to stratify this and create a minimum wage for the center, another minimum wage for the respective states. But I think the takeaway is that the socio-economic conditions obtainable in these climes are quite different, and that incrementally, as we progress, we might, as a state policy, get to that point. But at the moment, where it is, it's what the law says. But without forgetting this contradiction that I have mentioned, by the mere phrasing of the constitutional provision that accommodates this issue of wage and compensation. In short, besides declaring it a nullity, Section 9, subsection 2 criminalizes the refusal to pay minimum wage and prescribes forms, prescribe punishments, which the defaulting party will pay. I like to skip, since I'm hearing the I like to skip to just give one or two cases that excites me as I considered this view. For me, there is some improvement by the act that calls for a tripartite committee before the consideration of these issues of wage and makes it a participatory process, and even domicile it in the Wages and Salaries Commission. But I have one fundamental problem with the minimum wage as it stands now. It doesn't inspire as much confidence, in my view, as it should, because, for instance, the section of the Act that requires that the Minister of Labor and Employment should be the one to activate the process of resolving conflict. In my view, it's not just non-operational in our system. It has defied any meaningful operationalization, because we have not seen. It is indeed the ministers who constitute the kind of stumbling block that we have witnessed. Now, the other point is that it creates a time limit. It creates a time limit that you must approach the court and say 30 minutes. For me, that is inadvertently creating a limitation, a status of limitation, to say that if you cannot approach the National Industrial Court within 30 minutes, you will be shut out of accessing the court and seeking redress. Finally, since I'm getting a lot of signals, we must be careful as labor leaders and as policy givers to understand the difference between agreements and memorandum of understanding and memorandum of agreement. The simple truth, as the law stands today, is that an understanding is not binding. So most unions, most organizations, and there are cases already decided by appellate courts to show that an understanding is merely an intention to create an agreement. And so when you go into your negotiations, and the best you could do is to have an understanding, you are holding your opponent not very firmly, because the courts have said that it is not enforceable except it is incorporated into the body of private. Well, my paper will be turned in, and I hope it will be shared so that I'm not accused of mistake. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barrister Maraki Uman. So please, presenters, remember that you have to turn in your fully written papers to the team of rapporteurs and then make presentations here for 7 minutes. So the next, I want to recognize again, he was recognized in the morning but he's back, stepped out briefly, the Executive Secretary of National Human Rights Commission, Barrister Antonio Ojukwu. You're welcome, sir. So you're supposed to be here, so please we invite you because you're one of the speakers. Thank you very much. Very quickly, may I ask if the representative of the Executive Director of PLAC is here? Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. Please, if you are here, please come to the front. So next to speak in this bill is Bash Mohammed. He represents the country program director of the American Center for International Labor Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Okay, while coming here, the initial thought is that I'm going to join the panel, so I didn't have any prepared presentation. But mostly, I think I want to emphasize that the Solidarity Center is fully American Center for International Labor Solidarity. We are the largest workers-based organization in the US, headquartered in Washington, D.C. So in Nigeria, we've been working with our trade union partner, majorly being the NLC and TUC. So with this, as a labor supporting organization, when our trade union partner has spoken, our ordinary should not talk. Yes, especially when Comrade President has spoken in the morning, I should just rest my case on what he said. But I think it's important I make some clarifications. Because observing proceedings, something just jumped at me. Just keep on mentioning minimum wage. But interestingly, as a student of history, when the whole idea of minimum wage started as far back as 1919, with the first ILO constitution, the right phrase is minimum living wage. But I don't know, maybe it's an omission or, I don't know, we just leave the living wage out of it, which is very fundamental. And maybe that's why we are where we are. I think, apology to Professor Shibanjo. I also want to emphasize that there's a lot of jurisprudence on the issue of national minimum wage as against the perception that the ILO has not done so much. I think thanks to our convention, that's one of the few, people might correct me, that's one of the few that we have three different conventions. From that of 1999, 1924, and I think of recent, we have the ILO Declaration on Social Justice. So I think the ILO has done so much on that. Problem then has to do with implementation. But importantly, my emphasis is this. I want to sit back and let's have engagement on this, but I want to emphasize that if we're discussing minimum wage, we should discuss it within the context of ILO. And also, ILO has made this thing very easier. With the COVID-19, there's this new social contract. So whatever I want to discuss, I want to make many out of this, so that you not turn to another talk shop, a lot of rhetoric, no action. So we should situate our deliberation, our discussion on concept of a new social contract, which is I think the major word is we understanding the imbalance between the worker and his employer. They are not on equal footing, so we must try so much to elevate the worker so that they can be on the same footing. And that will bring me to, just let me emphasize this core issue. Firstly, I've identified the first, which is the problem of definition. The whole use of the word minimum wage, I don't think with due respect is correct. It should be minimum living wage. By the time we put living, we understand that giving somebody 30,000 stipend in a month is actually not even taking him to the next bus stop, not talk of taking him home. Also, component also, I also observed that, except my learned friend, that emphasize other component of wages. It's not just about salary. Nobody works forever. I'm still young, but I know I will not work forever. So we should look at beyond what you are getting immediately. You should be futuristic to look at social security. So if you're discussing minimum wage, you should also put what we'll be doing, because I can share experience as a union organizer with TUC in River State. When I was in River State, I saw an old man traveling all the way from those that know what's the name of this Bonny Island. He come to Port Harcourt to collect 100 naira. I was shocked. It's gratuity. Because maybe when they were negotiating, the emphasis is on what he's getting as a worker, but now he's a retiring. So we should, and then also coverage. Regrettably, I think by World Bank statistics, 70% of the workforce and the informal sector. But all the discussion since morning has centered around those of us that do is it 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 job? What about those in the informal sector? And importantly also, bearing in mind that the world of work is changing. So, and regrettably, the current law is that I think they excluded. Okay, I think the issue is that the minimum wage applies to an employer that has up to 5. So, if I want to pass a verdict, the majority of us, we have house help that will give them as little as 10,000 a month, but we come here to talk big. So, also, in answering your question, I also want us to situate between public ordering or collective bargaining. Sharing experience. I think the UK has this fantastic arrangement. Their minimum wage is staggered. I think from 16 to 17 is 14 point something pounds per hour. From 21 to something, I think in discussing this is one best practice we can borrow. But as a young man, your responsibility cannot be compared to doctor that maybe has 2 or 3 kids in university. And also another thing I also want to emphasize is that in discussing minimum wage, like the trade union partners believe, I think anything labor, we should leave it where it is. It should be under the exclusive legislative list for now. Because even when there's a law, we have some rogue governors that are yet to implement that. There's a state I will not mention that they're still finding it hard to implement the 18,000 minimum wage. And some persons are saying that they should move it to, apparently there's going to be drama. So as I said earlier, my task is for us to have engagement on this matter, not for me to make any, and then sorry if I have spoken why Mr. President has spoken. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bash Mohammed, who is representing his country program coordinator. And next on this bill is the Executive Director, Amnesty International Nigerian Office, is Barrister Asai Ojigo.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I sense that the energy levels in the room are a bit low, but please do bear with us. We'll try as much as possible to get you awake, keep you awake, so that you can participate actively in this very important conversation. So, from me at Amnesty International, I would like to frame this discussion around the international human rights framework, because I'll leave the technicality in terms of determining the amount, the structures, the dates, even the revision of the laws to the experts. But rather, how do we view the international best practices in relation to workers' rights and to this particular topic at hand, wages. So the foundation of all of this conversation is the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which Nigeria has ratified. And the bulk of my intervention would focus on the general comment number 23 of 2016 on the right to just and favorable conditions of work, which specifically expands Article 7 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And the idea is that the committee, this is the committee in charge of this particular covenant, sought a very important intervention to help countries like Nigeria to be able to actualize beyond the letters of the covenant what it means to be a right, just, and favorable conditions of work. So I start by saying that everyone has the right to work. So everyone here, that is our right. This right is also linked to our right to dignity. So that's why it's essential that in compartmentalizing what this entails, that we're looking at it in the broader sense of human rights dignity. How do we perceive ourselves and how do we perceive others? Thirdly, this right to work includes opportunity to earn a livelihood and to be able to work in a profession that you've freely chosen yourself or as accepted. So which is really critical in order for us to distinguish between forced labor and to be able to call out forced labor when we see it. So the general comment starts by stating that the right to just and favorable conditions of work is a right of everyone, without distinction of any kind. The reference to everyone highlights the fact that the right applies to all workers in all settings, regardless of gender, age, disability, whether you're in the formal or informal sector, whether you're a migrant worker, whether you are from an ethnic minority group, and it also includes domestic workers, self-employed workers, agricultural workers, refugees, and even those who volunteer and could be considered unpaid workers. I will expand on 4 areas as a result of the time that we have left. One is on remuneration, the second is on fair wages, the third is on equal remuneration for work of equal value without distinction of any kind, and the fourth is remuneration that leads to decent living, which the previous speaker has already alluded a bit to. So when we look at remuneration, which is the first point, it goes beyond the restricted notion of wage or salary. We're talking about the complete package, so to speak. So it's not just the take-home that is considered, but also services or packages which the employer can provide in cash or kind to the employee, and can also include things like childcare facilities, health insurance. Secondly, fair wages. All workers have a right to fair wage. When we talk about a fair wage, this is something that is not static. It evolves. It can be evaluated based on objective criteria. You look at the work the person is doing. You look at the responsibility, the experience, the level of skills that the person brings to work in comparison to others. You also look at how dangerous is this work that this person is doing. Can also determine what a fair wage would be, and whether there are specific hardships related to this work and the impact on the worker's personal and family life. I'll give an example. If you have workers that regularly leave home to perform work elsewhere, you provide them a DSA or a per diem in order to compensate for that time away from home and to be able to provide services for themselves which they would not otherwise need to if they were at home. So an assessment of fairness should also take into account the position of female workers, particularly where the work and pay has traditionally been undervalued. So wages should be regular, they should be timely, and they should be paid in full in all circumstances. Third, equal remuneration for work of equal value without distinction of any kind, in particular, women being guaranteed conditions of work not inferior to those enjoyed by men, with equal pay for equal work. What do we mean? Not only should workers receive equal remuneration when they perform the same or similar jobs, but their remuneration should be of equal value, even when their work is completely different, but nonetheless of equal value when assessed by objective criteria. And so even this distinction that state is making with federal workers is something that needs to be evaluated more critically, because if you're providing the same service, it's just that you're at state level rather than federal level. That is what we're already moving into an area of discrimination, which we really shouldn't be condoning. So, distinction of any kind is not permitted. And an objective job evaluation is important to avoid indirect discrimination, because this can also happen when you are not fully aware of how the impact of determining what is a fair wage and how it's equally applied works. So, for example, full-time workers get bonuses, part-time workers do not. We have to be careful that if the majority of your workers that are on part-time level are women, that could technically be indirect discrimination and could create a gender bias even in terms of determining what equal pay for equal work means. And that is why you see in some contracts they'll say it's prorated, and this should be continued in terms of ensuring that the equal remuneration for women and men of work of equal value is promoted. And this distinction does not in any way prevent women from enjoying specific conditions of work relating to pregnancy and maternity protection. Fourth, remuneration that provides all workers with a decent living for themselves and their family is closely linked to the notions of fairness and equality. So while fair wages and equal remuneration are determined by reference to the work performed by the individual worker, as well as in comparison to other workers, remuneration that provides a decent living must be determined by reference to outside factors, such as the cost of living and other prevailing economic and social conditions. This is really the heart of the matter, because it goes to the point of dignity, to ensure that whatever is determined as the minimum wage is the minimum amount of remuneration that an employer is required to pay wage earners for the work performed during a given period, which cannot be reduced by collective agreement or an individual contract. So what does this look like? For a minimum wage to be substantial, it must be periodically reviewed, and we can leave it open to determine how often that should be. It must be indexed at least to the cost of living, and it must be participatory in its determination. So you cannot sit down and determine a minimum wage as the state. You must involve workers, employers, their representatives, and other bodies who could participate directly in providing advice, but also sharing lived experiences in order to determine a fair minimum wage. It must be recognized in legislation, but flexible enough so that it can be adaptable as living conditions evolve. The minimum wage should apply systematically, protecting as much as possible the fullest range of workers, including workers in vulnerable situations. The minimum wage might apply generally or differ across sectors, regions, zones, and professional categories, so long as the wages apply without direct or indirect discrimination and ensure a decent living. We recognize that if you live in a big city like Abuja, Lagos, so there might be differential considerations in terms of what housing looks like, what sort of wages you give to workers living in those particular cities. And if you live in smaller cities, there might be some price differential. Or ultimately, the same application should apply to ensure that you are not committing direct or indirect discrimination. I will end on one point, and this, of course, is something we can debate a bit further if there is time. The committee was quite clear that the failure of employers to respect the minimum wage should be subject to penal or other sanctions. Appropriate measures, including effective labor inspections, are necessary to ensure the application of minimum wage provisions in practice. So the question I would leave is, if the biggest employer of labor is the state and has failed to provide the minimum wage, what is the penal or other sanction that will be imposing on them? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Executive Director, Amnesty International Nigeria Office, and for sticking to time too. Quickly, we want to recognize the representative of the Permanent Secretary, Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment. Clement Fatoki is the Deputy Director. He will be presenting on behalf of the Permanent Secretary. Please, will you come to the front row quickly, please. Next to speak here is Director General NECA. Director General NECA, Nigerian Employers Consultative Association. Oh, it's taking a break. Okay. Quickly, representative of the Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Ismail Bello. He's a Deputy General Secretary.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Comrade Moderator. I think my job is a bit simple because most of the issues has been largely covered in the course of our discussion. I'm looking at wage bargaining and negotiations. And coming from the background of the union, we see collective bargaining as an opportunity to improve the well-being and the welfare of our members. So for us, the labor bargaining provides us the opportunity of defending workers' interests. It provides us that opportunity to maintain and improve their living conditions. It embraces the various negotiating methods and procedures which are used to reach agreement between trade unions and employers at all levels. Whether it's regional, whether it's national, between a single union or between a multiple of unions and a group of employers. It is normally consensual. In other words, the parties agree to the process and is guided by procedural and substantive. Procedural in terms of the parties agreeing to the framework in which that will be done. Substantive in relation to relying on previous experiences and see what do they need to do to improve the situation of the working people in the different sectors of the economy. Now, there are basic things that we need to consider when we talk about bargaining. There are certain assumptions. First is that it's voluntary. Two is that, and we've spoken about this, is that the social partners have some weight. You have an employer that is responsible. You have a government that regulates the system. And you have a workers' union that is having behind it the workforce. So there's an assumption that there's a union. And we know, given what is happening likely in the economy and the increasing pressure of employers to deny workers the right to organize, that also impacts very negatively on the ability of workers to negotiate. Of course, the legal foundation has been laid in terms of also the borrowing from the International Convention around 7 further strengthening and the right of workers to come together. And we know that the entire trade union amendment programs from 1978 to 2005 were aimed at creating industrial unionism in our country. And the hope and the basis was that this was going to form the basis for collective bargaining in the different sectors. So what does bargaining cover? Normally it should cover virtually everything that is involved in the relationship at work. From issues of day-to-day grievances to the issues of work, how work is going to be arranged, what is going to be paid, holiday, healthcare, and increasingly new issues like climate change and job transition and what implication that is going to have for workers, gender-based violence, health and safety issues. So we are saying that collective bargaining should give an opportunity for the parties to set the rules that will guide their relationship and address the basic concerns. And of course, on the other side, I'm sure that I'm not an employer and a worker. On the other side, it's also address management concern around issues of productivity and workers' attitude to work and all of that. We can use it. Now, I also try to quickly look at what are the issues that affect collective bargaining. Very simple way. Economic, which is very basic, political, and the social dimension. The economics somehow clear, but we can take a look at the social dimension. I've mentioned the part of it, which relates to the recognition for the union itself. Is the union getting that kind of recognition? Issues around unforeseen circumstances, pandemic for instance, the COVID-19 pandemic was something that was not foreseen. It impacted very negatively the world of work, such that people have to find the mechanism to be able to address this impact. And I give the example of Lufthansa workers. At the very beginning of COVID-19, the workers could see the danger ahead and the possibility that the employer would want to think about retrenchment. The workers themselves gathered and said, look, we'll part with our 20% to pass through this trouble and see whether government management on its own part can also keep us together at work. And it was something that worked for the two sides. So in essence, what we are saying is that once there is a willingness and on the part of the two sides to have a very open conversation around all issues, where there is a way, there will always be a way. Social conditions, I've spoken about. You can talk about weak workers. You can also talk about weak employers. And you can also talk about weak government, because government has a role in terms of its regulatory, particularly around health and safety issues and other issues that are not clearly monetary in nature. Sometimes issues like our own attitude, intolerance, how do we tolerate the other party. I will do a little discussion about this, particularly when in the context of public service public sector negotiation. How does the government see itself? Is it an employer? Is it a state? How does it use its position as a state to relate to the other party? Does it relate to the other party as equal, or it treats the other party as a minor in the relationship? So I think those are some of the issues around the economy, high level of unemployment, interest rate, inflation, weak company performance. All of those can determine which way collective bargaining will go. Political condition, we know what military rule did to Nigeria and to Nigerian workers in terms of compensation, in terms of wages and all of that, particularly given the prolonged years of wage freeze. And we've also seen what war in Ukraine and Russia is doing across the world, changing the economic template and disrupting the world of work. I look at bargaining structure. I think we spent a lot of time around that. How it works very effectively in the private sector, and while we are still struggling to institute a regime of collective bargaining in the public service. I look at the issue of implementation and ratification of agreements, and the case of ASU will come to mind, that you have an agreement and implementation becomes a perennial difficulty. I think we may need to reflect, I think very deeply, how are you going to ensure, I think the last speaker hammered on that, how are you going to sanction if a party, fair enough, and particularly that party is government. So around implementation, there are quite a lot of issues in the public service, because in the private sector, it appears seamless. When the two parties finish negotiation, it is incumbent on the employer to communicate its constituencies, and incumbent on the workers to also communicate the workers' group. And that way, implementation appear seamless. However, there are also genuine occasions of difficulty of implementing collective agreement. What do? You still go back to discuss. That's the power of negotiation. I recall sometimes in 2001, when we had 7,500 minimum wage in the textile sector. And the employers in the textile sector felt that to move from a regime of about 4,000 wage to 7,500 was going to be practically impossible, to have 100% wage. And after prolonged negotiation, an agreement was struck for 7,000, not 7,500. But the component of that 7,000, from the perspective of the worker, will also address the 7,500. What do I mean? In industry, people rely heavily on overtime work. And overtime work, housing is also a component of the basic. So how was it resolved practically? Now we are the minimum wage at the national level of 4,000 basic and 3,500 allowance. So the textile union was pushing that the textile employer must accept 4,000 basic and 3,500 allowances. But the employers were saying, hey, we can accept 4,000 basic,
on the condition that the entire package will not be more than 7,000. However, if you want a 7,005 package, we may have to stop at 3,000 basic, knowing that we will cure more on overtime, we will cure more on those other components that are defined by price. At the end of the day, as negotiators, we didn't come to a conclusion. We return back to our constituents to say this is the dialogue. And don't be surprised, don't take the worker for granted. The worker is intelligent, the worker knows what is of interest to him or her. At the open meeting, the workers, I'm sure, doing their calculation and calculations, okay, at the end of the day, go and take the 7,000. We'll live with this 4,000 basic. We can't accept the 3,000 basic for the 7,000 cross pay. So, at the end of the day, it was resolved that even at 7,000, several employers were not in a position to pay. Small employers. Now we have an agreement, industry-wide agreement, that was meant for everybody. We know the big players, we know the performance of each and everyone. We can discuss it. And we separated the minor player, the small players. So we had another round of conversation to say maybe we have a phase implementation and we have a phase observation of this matter. I'm saying this because collective bargaining is something that is based on knowledge, it's something that is based on capacity, and I think that is also completely missing in the public service. We need to find a way to ensure that we deepen that knowledge and that capacity. I've spoken about implementation, enforcement. I think she actually captured it. I take the crisis in Kaduna with Governor Rufai and organized labor. It was the Federal Minister of Labor that brokered the deal, that intervened, mediated, and did conciliation. So who will conciliate for ASU and federal government? I think it's a very critical question. And Prof is here. I'm sure that collectively we can think through it and see what happens. Now, I also try to look at why the negotiations fail. Of course, we can talk about expectations on both sides, on the side of workers and on the side of employers. Inability to communicate your offer and your interests very clearly on the table. Distrust between the parties. We saw that again. The Honorable Minister of Labour, we do apology to the ministry officials that are here and ASU. There's a mutual distrust between inability to also focus on negotiations and devote attention to other issues. I look very quickly at things around structure of collective bargaining. We've had a lot of discussion around it. I also look at the frequency of collective bargaining. I think even 5 years is on paper. In actual fact, minimum wage cycle is running to average of 10 years. And it's bad for negotiation. It doesn't build confidence, it doesn't also address the need and the concern of the people. So we need to think about the frequency of our agreement, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's a routine collective bargaining negotiation. If you want to take the experience of the private sector, again, given my experience in the past, we were having a 2-year cycle for the collective bargaining. But with the dynamic change in the economy, that the two parties also came together and said, hey, we have to be doing this every year. So you find most employers either looking at basic wage this year and then looking at the allowance component the following year. So you find a mix. So long as the parties are willing to discuss and put the issues on the table, there will always be a way to address it. Multiple structure in the public service, I think, is something that we need to reflect on and bridge the gap. In the private sector, we don't pay the same thing. There are differences, there are variations. Even within the same sector, there are disparities in a particular. I give a practical example of the tester union. You have a national negotiation. You find a company like Baku. The condition in Baku will be far superior to a company like AFA. Or to another company in Sanbota who employs 20-30 people. So I really don't know, but I'm just thinking that there are a lot of lessons to learn from what is happening in the private sector, and you need to do that. Now, composition of the bargaining team, and she spoke to it, but I will speak to it in a different dimension in terms of the inclusion of young people and women. Again, I will talk about my experience. Sometimes around 1997, thereabout, or 96. We were not too clear in the textile sector about the issue of, I think, is maternity. It was taken for granted that when a woman is to give birth, you go on your leave. But
There was this year, I think we included one of these women committee chair in the bargaining team. She raised that issue very eloquent, and that created an opportunity for the bargaining council to take a decision on the issue of maternity leave and for the working people. The inclusion of that woman benefited the entire industry, which was what we were missing excluding women. And I also think there are a lot of young issues for young workers that can only be understood and addressed by young workers when we include them in bargaining issues. Now, one thing I also like to quickly look at is the issue of the future of work and collective bargaining. I have in mind here gig workers, platform workers, and the large army of informal workers generally, who are outside of the coverage of collective bargaining. Somebody mentioned the issue of social protection. I think it's very key, because it will address the concerns of the large army of people. But beyond that, it's also to address the organizing rights of this category of workers. As it is, they are not defined as workers as such. They are treated as partners, they are treated as contractors, they are looked at in that way. Whereas what they do is work, but the work is defined by the platform, defined by the technology. You work for who you don't see. So a lot of health safety concerns, a lot of pay concerns that are not adequately addressed. So I think we can argue that we cannot end precarious condition of workers in the gig economy and digital platform without collective organization. We can debate what form we take, but it is needed for representation, for bargaining, and ultimately with a link with the labor movement for social dialogue. In conclusion, I will just read this. It will take 2 minutes. It will take what I mean. Globalization of production has dramatically changed production pattern globally through flexibilization and formalization of work. This change has impacted and changed the face of labor relations, often while the gains of collective agreement and leaving workers on the edge of precarity. The traditional workplace where workers physically build solidarity, engage employers, sign and ensure implementation of collective agreement is gradually fading away, and more workers are pushed into precarious employment. Precarious employment is defined by poor salary, overtime work without pay, no access to medical care, poor health and safety conditions, among others. This is the cause of the growing harming of the working poor. People who have jobs, but whose income is not capable of providing the basics of food, transport, and shelter. We must recognize the limitations of collective bargaining as a distribution mechanism. It is about power, which often is not equally shared. Given the way technology has impacted jobs and now globalization of production has altered work relations and the changing dynamics of the crisis of global capitalism, collective bargaining can hardly alter the existing pattern of income inequalities and poverty. Thus, trade unions and the NSIWC and other social partners must address more critical questions in terms of workers' participation and active involvement in the state, in the formulation and implementation of broad macroeconomic policies that will impact on labor welfare and the general well-being of the people through social dialogue. Thank you.
I have to say that Comrade Bello was very difficult to regulate. Was also an articulate speaker. Okay. So now I want to invite the Director General of the Nigerian Employers Consultative Council Association, I beg your pardon, Mr. Adewale Yorinde.
Thank you. Good evening. You know, in my place, they said there's an adage. My apologies to the elders. So where you have greeted good night, and you don't come back and say, you don't come back again to say good evening again. I hope I got you right. So I will not conspire to keep all of us longer than be longer than necessary, so I'll try and do as quickly as possible. While I will jettison some areas of my presentation that have been mentioned, because I think we have the same context of conversation with those in my group. So I'll just quickly emphasize those areas that were not mentioned, while I also hope that I touched the key parts. And my focus will basically be on the issue of tripartite engagement and compensation, and then have touch a snippet on great bargaining and other promoting rights and privileges in Nigeria. And the focus basically we look at how social dialogue has played a fundamental role within the context of the engagement between the tripartite. The ILO seriously give credence to the issue of tripartism within the context of the relationship between employers, relationship between workers, and also the relationship between government. And that was the foundation or the basis on which the context of our negotiation at the national minimum level, where it's rests, where we have the employers, the employees, and then government represented playing a critical role. And we call it social partners plus now, because all other agencies, private agencies, government agencies, they also have critical role to play in the context of supplying information during the negotiation or during the conversation about the national minimum wage. Also get them on board to play a very critical role. So the whole process of this conversation and engagement with the tripartite rests basically on social dialogue. And once we give credence to social dialogue, it gives us the opportunity to resolve so many issues, either issues that were anticipated or issues that were not anticipated. And the concept of this social dialogue has played a major role in the relative peace. I call it relative peace because you cannot, in an employment relationship, what you cannot run away from is conflict. And those conflicts are fueled basically from the perception. I mentioned earlier that our perception about what is a fair wage, our perception about what is a decent wage, our perception about what is a take-home pay that can actually take workers home. Our perception differs, but this is in the context of social dialogue that we can align those perceptions and come to a conclusion on the way forward. So in developing economies like ours, which is determined on the basis of direct tripartite negotiation between government and social partners. And it makes a lot of sense because these are parties involved in policy development and employment relationship. The ILO minimum wage fixing convention requires the direct participation of these three critical elements in setting the national minimum. And in the country we have the national minimum wage committee. And I raised the proposal earlier that will it suffice or is it sufficient for just the minimum wage committee to meet every 5 years, set up and agree on the modalities for setting the national minimum wage, set the national minimum wage, then everybody go to sleep, waiting for 5 years again before they convert again and start the process of setting another minimum wage. How often do they meet to review matters arising from the implementation of the minimum wage? And those are fundamental issues. We mentioned earlier the issue of the consequential adjustment. Do we in quote, create the problem as the committee, fix the wage, and then leave every other person to deal with the issue of the consequential adjustment? We feel it shouldn't be so. The committee act, National Minimum Wage Act, give powers to the tripartite committee, including those of making recommendation and review. And as our position, our candid view, that committee should not just go to rest after 5 years. It can play a more significant role within the context of resolving those issues. There have been news, there have been comments, there have been very bad to a large fact. We all know it. There are certain states are not paying the 30,000 anymore. Who is engaging them? Is there an institutional framework beyond what labor is doing? But is there a framework that can engage or that should engage all those that are not paying the national minimum wage? This way I would like to speak about the role of the National Labour Advisory Council. The part of NLSC was as a result of Nigeria's ratification of ILO Convention 144, which encouraged tripartite machineries to promote effective consultation at the national level between the government, employers, and workers' organizations, as well as the implementation of labour standards.
For many years, until last year, almost 7, 8 years, the National Labour Advisory Committee was, whether it was conspired against, whether circumstantially, but the committee did not meet for 7 years. Last year, when the committee met for first time. And the perspective is that with NLAC, complementing or the Committee on National Minimum Wage, complementing the work of the NLAC, then there should be some level of seamless interaction, seamless and focused engagement where all these issues concerning wage, concerning competition can be dealt with. A strong NLAC would probably also have intervened within the context of the issue of the ASU and government quagmire that have dragged for a long time. The ongoing of the labor law, ongoing of national labor law, also is in tandem with global best practices. A lot of work has been done because we cannot work without we cannot work out of a framework, either a legal framework or a social framework. So we know that a lot of work has been done within the context of the national labor law, contextual and overall review of that law. I want to commend the ILO for the role it has played, for the technical support it has given, and also thank the social partners for the commendable work that all of us have done within the context of the review of the labor law. And also hoping that the National Assembly will take the bull by the horn and also play their part in the context of finalizing the labor law, presented to the President for his assent, and let us have a new legal framework. We have made good progress in regards to tripartite engagement, I must confess, and also consultation in various labor law and economic matters. Yet, there is room for improvement. There is the need to strengthen the current tripartite instruments that we have in place so as to guarantee fairness, guarantee equity, and also guarantee ownership. In lot, we believe can be achieved through the mechanism of social dialogue. And lastly, for me, we have discussed the context of the wages, discussed the context of the mechanism or the process of setting the wage, either minimum wage or the wages of the organization at the private sector level. But one thing I want to emphasize again that we should not shy away from is the macroeconomic environment in which we all have to operate. The ecosystem where either negotiation, whether employment, the ecosystem where they subsist or where they are situated also is a very, very important thing that we also should not shy away from discussing. In an environment where a business pays close to 50 different taxes, levies, and fees, both legal and illegal, even when the employer is desirous of paying a living wage, those circumstances basically conspire against him to do that. Young government that's probably paying for scooping oil and we're sharing from the federation account. But as my Lord said earlier in the morning, we have to sit down beyond this conversation and also look at those contradictions in our environment, contradictions that we created for ourselves, or the contradictions that we fostered on ourselves. My colleague mentioned the issue of Ukraine-Russian war. Why are we trying all our problems to Ukraine and Russia? The war has made the oil price to increase significantly. Other countries are benefiting from that. But we are crying about Ukraine-Russia war. The issue of wheat because Ukraine is a major supplier of wheat. There's concern that wheat prices is increasing because Ukraine and Russia they are sneezing. Why must we complain about the issue of wheat, about agric when we have arable lands and a lot of opportunities to mitigate those challenges? So fundamentally, for me and for us, we must deal with those contradictions. If we don't deal with those contradictions, we will have built structure on a quick start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director General of NECA. The desire is to finish at the top of the hour, and that's close to like 10 minutes. So I encourage us to be very brief so we can still approximate 5 o'clock. I want to invite very quickly the Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria.
very much. First of all, let me apologize for coming in late. Mr. Moderator, I can see you have been discriminating in terms of allocation of time. It's got into my own time now, you are already warning me. However, we need to go home. Now, I'm coming in from the premise that what we are discussing, employment and wages, is a human rights issue. And we need to see it from the human rights standpoint. And that point has been made very clear in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Look at Articles 23, 24, and 25. If you look at Section 17.3 of the 1999 Constitution of Nigeria, as well as the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, they are saying that everyone has the right to work, the right to free choice of employment, the right to just and favorable conditions of work, and the right to protection against unemployment. Yes, my Lord, in the morning, Justice Kanye had stressed the fact that Chapter 2 of the Constitution of Nigeria relate to rights that are not justiciable. However, the Constitution made provision that for them to be enforceable, the National Assembly can make laws that can enable you to enforce them. And in the making of the law of the National Industrial Court, it empowered the National Industrial Court to apply international instruments and treaties to which Nigeria is a party. And all these conventions, ILO conventions, and so on and so on, Nigeria is already a party. For the National Human Rights Commission also, our law says that in resolving issues of complaints against human rights violations, we can apply international treaties and instruments to which Nigeria is a party. Also, I know that fundamental rights enforcement procedural rules are not laws, but the courts have also initiated the fundamental human rights enforcement procedural rules, which enjoins the court also to look at international treaties to which Nigeria is a party in terms of interpretation of the fundamental rights of the people. And we are saying that the issue of wages and employment are human rights, and we need to see it from that perspective. So these have crystallized employment rights as follows: the right to work, the right to free choice of employment, the right to just and favorable conditions of work, and the right to just conditions of work will include fair wages, equal pay for equal work, equal remuneration for work of equal value. And for favorable conditions of work, we are looking at reasonable work hours, adequate rest and leisure, as well as periodic paid holidays. Also, the minimum wage that allows for decent living for ourselves and our families. And other protection rights will include protection against unemployment and right to non-discrimination in employment. Now, the issue of fair wages can be defined as wages which shall include wages for a weekly day of rest and other allowances, whether for time or piecework, after taking into consideration prevailing market rates for similar employments in the neighborhood. Now, the ILO had, the ILO Constitution in 1999, of course, went as far as talking about, what makes a living wage. But the Universal Declaration said that wages, that to have lasting peace, for it to be established, it has to be based upon social justice. So, if you want to have lasting peace, you must pay wages that are just and fair and are able to address the concern of workers. Although the current version of the ILO Constitution has somehow not talked about what the living wage should be, but originally in 1999 it talked about it. And he said that the living wage should be payment to the employed of a wage adequate to maintain a reasonable standard of life, as this is understood in their own country and time. But further, in the ILO Minimum Wage Fixing Convention number 131 of 1970, it is explicit on what the minimum wage should take into account. The needs of the workers and their families, taking into account the general level of wages in the country, the cost of living, social security benefits, and relative living standards of other social groups. 2, economic factors, including the requirements of economic development, levels of productivity, and the desirability of attaining and maintaining a higher level of employment. The issue of payment of fair wages and being a human rights issue. If you look at the minimum wage that was in 18,000 naira, and now it's 30,000 naira. Can this really take anybody home? What is fair about that? We think that the discussion on issues surrounding wages and salaries in general have always been considered as a socio-economic issue, but it is the view of the National Human Rights Commission and other human rights advocates that this is indeed a fundamental human rights issue, as this provides greater legitimacy for labor standards. As a fundamental right, it is therefore inalienable, it is universal, it is interrelated, indivisible, and non-derogable. And it is for this reason of not recognizing wages and employment rights as fundamental over the years that the clamor for fair wages and the exertion of employment rights within the workforce has continued to dominate the entire polity without achieving the full implementation of labor laws in the country. Again, for the same reason, fair wages and uniformity of minimum wage amongst workers in the federal and states, as stipulated by ILO and other international conventions, seem a Herculean task to achieve in Nigeria. There's no gainsaying that employment rights and fair wages in Nigeria are not preeminent at all, and also not the finest in the league of countries in the world. Although the Constitution and our laws underscore the importance of social inclusion and the need to harness national resources to engender national prosperity on the basis of social justice and equality of status and opportunity, we have not been able to develop a fair wage compensation system that will give meaning to these national objectives. There are many wage structures in the public service. Some are outrageous, remuneration, severance, and pension packages. Others are impoverished and miserable, salaries, severance, and pension packages. There has been no scientific or empirical evidence or clear criteria in terms of knowledge, skill, attitude, or even productivity inputs to justify these disparities. So what then is the fairness of the wage disparity in public service? This is clearly social injustice and unfair. Due to the legal constraints, aggrieved civil servants cannot access the courts for judicial redress on the basis of both the ILO conventions being contravened, and the system must find a way to use policy to address this injustice and unfairness. This is the policy forum. We must rise from this forum today to direct our policy on wages and employment towards achieving the policy directions of the Constitution. Most times, government is not held responsible for labor offenses, and most employees condone all manner of treatment due to high unemployment rate. The reason for this is not far-fetched. Most employers don't abide to labor laws simply because of lack of appropriate enforcement and sanctions. Nigerian labor laws stipulate minimum standards which every employer must abide with, but this is grossly abused. The non-conformity with just and favorable salaries and wages standards in Nigeria as seen in different salary structure of public servants, the inability and refusal of some state governments to pay the stipulated minimum wage and salaries of workers are major setbacks in achieving industrial harmony in the country. The labor unions, of course, have even complicated this because they have now become politicized. So among the challenges facing fair wages in Nigeria, we propose that non-consideration of wages as a fundamental right issue, as a non-derogable issue, as an inalienable issue, as an indivisible and universal issue is a problem. And non-conformity in salary structure at various government levels. The issue of government categorizing salaries into federal and state, even when the workers face the same economic situation that affects them, results to discrimination, deprivation, and hardship. Changing of employment terms midway, like making the position of director become a tenured appointment, disregarding the retirement age of directors, which was the understanding at the time of employment. These things bring a lot of dislocations that hold the system. Casualization of workers is yet another challenge facing employment rights and other ethical practices meted out to Nigerian workers. Lack of willingness to actualize government policies and programs as regards labor laws. Nigerians' overdependence on top-to-bottom bureaucracy, inadequate infrastructure, manpower and poor recruitment mechanism, and corruption. Now, looking at our recommendations, we recommend that government should apply its policies towards making wages and salaries a fundamental rights issue and restore the dignity of wages. Government should lead by example by honoring labor agreements. Agreements are meant to be kept. Government should also endeavor to develop and enforce uniform salary structure at all levels of government. All state governments should endeavor to offset workers' salaries. Government should strengthen ways of protecting workers from abuses of employers and enact punitive measures for violators of Nigerian labor laws. Nigerian labor laws should conform to international labor law standards, whether they are for state or federal government. There should be independent and corruption judiciary, devoid of external influence, to support the full implementation of our labor laws. The overbearing interference of the Ministry of Labor on the Nigerian Labour Congress tends to shrink the space for labor activities and rights. The Nigerian Labour Congress should be allowed to operate as it should so that the dignity in labor can be respected. In conclusion, we are saying that wages and salaries are not just financial or economic subjects, they also raise human rights issues that must be recognized as such. I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission, Anthony Ojukwu, SAN. So the last speaker, because we still have, and I think he's not here anymore representing the PS. I don't think he's here. Okay, so quickly let's go to, maybe have a closing remark. The other chairperson of session, Professor Nyondoro, just make a quick remark before we go to questions, if you want to.
Let me existing protocol. Sitting down, well, I was supposed to be a chair, session, so I close the remarks. It's just a reflection of the average Nigerian worker. I want to talk about Nigerian worker, whether it's a driver, messenger, or director, public service, particularly in the public service. The issue of motivation. I ask myself, how motivated is the Nigerian worker? What are those factors that would impact on the motivation of the Nigerian worker? I believe that a motivated worker, by the time you talk about no work, no pay, it will be a big deal. And we're talking about losing some days, not even months of work to be a big deal. I want to align myself very strongly with the submission of the representative of Amnesty International talking about fair wages. And saying this, statement made by Bashman also about living minimum wage. I want to subsume it under fair wages. I don't think we will go far in terms of our workplace relations, industrial harmony, and the motivation of the Nigerian worker if the issue of fair wages, developing fair wage compensation structure like the last speaker said, if we are not able to do that, the average Nigerian worker will continue to be demotivated, and this will throw up a lot of frustrations, disputes, contradictions in the workplace. I think that it's not a straightforward thing. It's something that, because we need to think using the system approach. We're talking about minimum wage, we're talking about labor laws, all these things will need to be brought together and placed in a systems approach that will address these things simultaneously. And then we'll begin to talk about, I was in South Africa, as a visiting lecturer sometime. And I observed that the messenger carries himself with dignity of labor, not anything different from, a director somewhere, because the issue of fair wages, have been addressed. You don't have iniquities that throw up, dissatisfactions, frustrations, and ultimately disputes, and productivity challenges and problems. So I think it's something that really requires sitting down, not just giving it to one component of the public. There's a need to really bring together professionals from these different areas so that these things can be properly marshaled, properly and critically, dealt with. The chair really talked about the fact that you need to evaluate, job evaluation. What are you bringing to the table? What are the, skills? What the value you're adding, you're bringing to the table? And this is also tied with, particularly in the public sector, coming from the university, you have the issue of inadequate facilities. That's one of the things you must provide facilities for your worker. Otherwise, it leads to frustrations also. It's also tied to the issue of the job skills gap, which we're talking about unemployability of the graduates. So these things are clearly hydra-headed, but they must need to be tied together by bringing, together the right professionals to deal with it, so that the state put it within the systems approach. Then the state, which would be a listening state, will be able to honestly deal with the matter. Why are people changing their age? One of my PhD students just did work on pensions, and interrogated the issue of age falsification. And the result was that we are not sure about the future. So we keep falsifying age just to stay there. And lastly, there is the issue of the fourth industrial revolution, talking about the future of work, which has, been put on us, whether we like it or whether you're in third world country or wherever you're coming from. A particular crop of workers who are invisible. I'm not talking about those doing remote work from the organization. There are people who are working remotely. They are behind the scene. They are not recognized. They don't even have, letters of employment. They are not covered on any collective bargaining. What is the Ministry of Labor doing about it? In fact, some of them work very insecure, environment. We need to think about all this. Just a critical reflection. Thank you.
you very much, Professor Ifeanyi Onyenoro, Professor of Workplace Relations at the University of Ibadan and Chairman of Session here for your intervention. We want to close urgently, but not without getting the interventions from the audience. So maybe by way of questions and comments so that the presenters can attend to them very quickly. So chairperson of session, Dr. Mrs. Famro, please can you direct us?
Okay. I'm sure that we've all listened and taking some notes. So this is, we need to leave this dialogue with concrete decisions and things that can be taken forward to move compensation management forward. So we want questions, and I kind of like those questions. I wish that I think that they should actually be projected. They are really guided. He has asked questions that need to be answered. So I hope that someone are taking notes. I have the questions down. So we want to really tackle some of this, and the rapporteurs are taking notes so that we can take some serious and definite tangible things out, which can then be actioned. The National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission are here, and they are going to do it. And Michael will be there, and all the First is also here. So let us please ask this. Let's be quick. Something has been asked to do. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. So let's just answer and take numbers, and I think those you may mention the person or concerned would actually identify the issues.
Maybe
number one. Two.
Yes. And I think it's just two.
Three. What? Three, yeah.
Two. Three.
Okay, four there.
Four.
Any more? Thank you very much.
My name is Olivia Ofodele-Omadi. I'm Vice Chair, Industrial Arbitration Panel. We've heard so much about motivation of workers, but nobody has actually mentioned the fact that, to be candid, some so-called workers don't even have any business being where they are. Most have certificates, but they lack the knowledge, they lack the skill, and even the zeal and willingness to learn. I was in the private sector, legal practice for about 25 years. I have seen lawyers that were called to the bar. They can't even do simple drafting. Lately, I'm in IAP. IAP has a supervisory minister as the Minister of Labour. In my office, I have about 4 staff. Some or one is supposed to be a secretary, this is that. They cannot do anything. They cannot work on the computer. They just are not productive. Most times they're not even there. If you see them there, it's just to complain. One told me the other day, Madam, find something for me. I haven't been paid salary. I said, we are paid from the same source. I haven't been paid as well. I perfectly understand. I may be in a better position than them. But then, most people are really unproductive. So my suggestion is, I'm not a financial guru, I said, I'm a citizen of Nigeria, I'm old enough to know what is happening around me and the way things were previously. I think we need to compress, we need to merge. Maybe when we merge, I'm not an advocate of laying staff off. Maybe as they progress, people retire, we might have a sizable number to manage, and there's a big need for training. Even when you call for training, most people will not be there, they'll just register. If there's any stipend they're going to get from the office, that's what they take. And even when they're there, they're not listening. So we'll be snoring away their time. So we're talking of employers. Employees have a big stake in this. Thank you so much.
Good evening, panelists. I must confess that I came here with a different expectation, really.
I thought we'd be talking about how to fast track the need for us to harmonize salaries of workers in the public service. It is long overdue. We're in a transitional phase. We don't have a luxury of time. Now we have started talking. We'll talk from now till when this government that is showing some significant interest in increasing salaries of workers go. And then the new one will come with no proper briefing. And then the knowledge is lost. All this conversation, we should limit it. The milestones are there. In 2012, we had a committee like this that was set up by the then president. They did the work, wrote the report, nothing came out of it. And now we have started talking again towards the end of another transition, another government. What can be done to fast track this process? Salary harmonization will take care of even the minimum wage we are talking about. If you harmonize salaries of those in the public sector, some are overpaid beyond others. Madam, people are not working well because they are demotivated. They are demotivated. So if people are paid living wages, they will bring in their best to the table. So time is of the essence. We don't have time for extensive conversation. The milestones are there. Workers are not well paid in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me level on existing protocol. My issue cut across 3 areas. The first is linked to what the first gentleman just said. I want us to go back and look at oral science report. That committee did a very great work. They went across the length and breadth of Nigeria on trying to streamline the process and then to reduce the disparity in wages. This report was thrown away, and he said Oromsonyi was not even compensated. It was handed over by NSIWC or NSIWC, and the man was disgraced somehow. That report is critical to our existence. The ministry's procedure should be streamlined. We are too bogus and wasting so much, which nobody is even looking at. Most of these ministries, they have small parastatals with small relatives of their fellows or children that are directors there, which many people are not even looking at. And they're having so much, traveling left and right, doing very little. Those that are doing so much are not even recognized. Anyway, instead, they are put to the background. It's important to look at that. And then this issue of disparity in wages, I want the National Commission on the Wages and Salary Income to look at it seriously. I don't think they exist only to look at what you just heard. That basic or whatever that they are controlling the minimum wage. No, I don't think so. Even for any organization to raise its allowances, it must be looked at. We all work in the same environment. We go to the same market. We are feeling the action, all of us. Why should somebody have a very, very big take-home? The money section handles issues like that. Why should you have a very big take-home compared to others at any? Yet you say there's a minimum wage. This minimum wage has been totally eroded. If you ask of what we have now in our different organizations, it's different. We're not collecting the same thing. And we say we work with federal, state, or local government. Should that be the Nigeria of our dream? When you go outside the country or when you read about other countries, minimum wage is minimum wage. Whether you work in the hotel, whether you clean gutter, whatever you work in filling station, what that minimum is due to you, you get it. And that is why you see people, working in different sectors. When they finish work here, they go to another place, they hand from here, they hand from there. But we don't have things like that. You sit down in your office for the next 8 hours of the day, and at the end you get nothing to show for it. It's very important. And in the morning, they ask them, Chairman mentioned something about hardship allowance. I think the National Wage Commission should please look at it and take it as a policy. There's so much hardship in Nigeria. So much people are suffering. And then if there's going to be any increment, please look at this disparity seriously. The top, honestly, the percentage should be reduced. Bring down the percentage and let the very big percentage start from the downtrodden. They are the ones. And that's why we have so many kidnappings, fraudulent practices, stealing or thieving as they call it now. People are jumping, running away, and a lot of thefts are going on around us. And nobody is looking at it. It's important. We take care of the downtrodden because very soon they may be entering from house to house to slaughter people, not only to take their money, but for anger. Do you know that in some cases they enter some houses, they take nothing, but they destroy the entire property, or they even set it ablaze, or kill the breadwinner there? It's because of that violence, the anger that is within. So please, the policy needs to be altered, not just to talk and talk every time, but to take it with all manner of seriousness and let us move Nigeria from where we are. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody, and I stand on this protocol. The question I really want to ask, my name is Iroka Samson. I'm from the ICPC. Yeah, the question I really want to ask is the salary differentials. You find out that they were real out there by some of the speakers. Were they really a product of research-based job evaluation? Yeah, because if proper job evaluation is not done, and there are these differentials, there is a big problem. Because somebody to be paid A, B, or C, should be based on a research-based differential which will weight the effort to the pay. Then, personally, I have in the past worked in the private sector. I do know that you don't just add number, bring people to work. It's based on the actual need of that organization. When my chairman was saying something, talk about the number in some of these organizations with MBS. Those numbers are really required. These are some of the issues that should be addressed, because you don't just maybe because you want to address issue of unemployment, they just put people on job. That is wrong, because they're just increasing the problem without solving it. Because those people, they're not adding value and they are paying. Thank you very much.
Did you take a number? But we have to take it whether or not you took a number, because you have vested interest.
Yes, I do. Sometimes I have to intervene to put perspective to what we're discussing. There was a time when every public officer in this country was earning the same thing. You had small differences in allowances. But the academia came out to say, we do not belong to the general category of civil servants, so we want to pull out. And they did. Immediately that happened, the health sector said, if you have allowed this other group to get out, we also do not belong to the general category of civil servants. So that's how it's a merry-go-round. So when we are doing these things, it's very easy to cast stones without knowing the historical perspectives. Now I seem to see a situation. Everybody decided that collective bargaining is bargaining. Now some people are able to bargain more than others. Some are able to replace bargain with some other words that I do not wish to mention. And the inherent misalignments that go in built-in factors throw up situations like this. If I go with you to a car stand, the moment they see me, which is very unfortunate, they think I have more money than the gentleman from human rights, whereas he has more money than I do. Perception. So always bear at the back of your mind that whatever decisions you want to take, that's why I need to give you this feeler, so that you are able to arrive at decisions. That whatever decisions you are throwing up, there are also consequences. I do know that when we talk about hazard allowance, if you give me 100,000 naira every day to be working in the plane, flying between anywhere in Nigeria. By the time we go through turbulences, let me put it that way, I don't want 100,000 again. I know a lot of prayer warriors who are here when they have slight turbulence. So please bear your mind, because we are taking note of all these things, and there are considerations that we see. There are certain offices you walk into, very, very business-like. Nobody needs to tell you that you must be at work. And even if you are not at work, you have job descriptions. If you are working in an organization that does not have a job description, why are you shouting that this other person who is in the setting that you have a job description? I can imagine her frustration coming from private sector. And the usual story is government work is not your father's job. But you see, the bigger consequences that is waiting for all of us is what we're not discussing yet. Pensions. Because if you're not working now to generate the pensions that will take care of you then, it's going to be very, very terrible. So I need to occasionally stand up to give you some background. I have no value judgments whatsoever. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I think on number 4. Yeah, the earlier numbers. Don, somebody is insisting there. Can we take that person, last man standing?
All right. So, but very quickly.
The chairman of the section, thank you very much. Let me stand by the system protocol. My name is Comrade Director Sunday Okoyete from the DHR of Federal Character Commission. I came in late, but I must commend the chairman of the Salary and Wages Commission for engaging us in this good and timely workshop, compensation management in Nigeria. I want to align with all others who have spoken before me on the need to look at the disparity of the salaries in the civil service. It is very pathetic. I wish I would have joined the political wagon, where I will be even a councillor, where they will pay me well. Not to talk of going to the Senate, but they will always accuse the public servants as being corrupt. I want to tell you, I will not shy away that this disparity in wages is encouraging corruption. Yes, we all go to the same market. We all have families. I want to challenge. When you say 30,000 minimum wage, compare it to what the naira is worth today. Per dollar in 30 days time. What do you expect? The civil servant, how much are we paid?
Thank you very much.
I want to say here that in my primary school days, there's a teacher who will say, an empty bag cannot stand perpendicular. I have been asking that an empty bag cannot stand perpendicular. Yes, it's true. When you pick an empty bag and open it, can it stand straight? You must feel something into it before it can stand perpendicular. So you are saying that the public servant who are not corrupt. Personally, I don't know. If you go to my account, I cannot boast of even 50,000 naira as a director. And you are accusing us that we are corrupt. Please, the chairman of Salary and Wages Commission, I want to commend you. Please, when you are reviewing it, take into conclusion that we will stamp out to a large extent in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think the message is clear that during the review process, it's also the wage must stand perpendicular. So, Madam, what do we do? Maybe we just, if we want to react generally.
Prof, can we just give him
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Now, differential. Private sector. Depending on your area of investment, that will determine the kinds of skills you require and the kind of departments that you will create and the number of persons you would like to engage. Depending again on the service or product, you can also identify which of the departments are more critical to your operations and profitability. And that's one of the reasons in law you talk of projection of management, whether you are the chief accountant or your security person, depending on your activity, they will regard you as projection of management, and you cannot join opinion. To cut a long story short, depending on their activities and their perception and contribution of the various departments, they will pay that accordingly. So differentials exist by definition, depending on the importance they attach to those activities. Now, when you transfer that to the public sector, where you have the oil and gas industry, if you remove that on those days of coal mining, tin mining, gold and all of that, if you remove all of this, come to the main civil service, then we do have a challenge of explaining the type of differentials and the scales. I think that's what's required. But to say that differentials, you see the public sector as a stage where you will harmonize, you use harmonize to mean equalization, then that is going to create far more problems than we can manage.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I'm sitting down, but just a quick one. Many comments, general comments, and that shows how much interventions were internalized. But I like the proposal that Madam Olivia made. He said he proposes that there would be some form of merger in the workforce. I think that is what could be taken on board as the general consideration is made, because it largely aligns with the earlier proposal by somebody else that talked about the Orasanya committee. The more we run away from that, the more we come to the realization that we actually cannot discount that one. There is the point about skills that are required as you consider issues of recruitment. It is corruption that has occasioned and guaranteed the kind of bloated civil service, public service that we have in this country. And what is painful about it is that whereas the majority of skilled, qualified Nigerians are out there unable to come in, you have in these systems persons who have very little or no need to be there. The implication is that we all pay one way or the other for that level of indiscretion. And finally, when you talk about the question of reward and compensation, at the heart of it is to what extent is the country itself, that is the nation, propelled by the government, to what extent are they self-committed to focus on productivity rather than patronage? That's my intervention.
Just a quick clarification. I think most of the issues are already duly addressed. I recall him talking about labor being politicized, and I guess he was making that in reference to our involvement with the Labour Party. The Labour Party is the baby of the NSC and the NSIWC, so we have a linkage. But that does not in any way take our identity and our independence as a trade union organization to affecting that relationship with the party. The party has its own structure, has its own constitution, has its own independent processes of taking its own decision, different from our own internal processes as a labor union. I think it's important I make that clarification.
Thank you very much. I just want to say something about human resource development institutions. From the issue raised, there'll be some workers who cannot do the work. I think we have some crisis with the issue of training. That's why I talked about, skill gaps and all that. The point is that I have been talking about the universities, polytechnics, even the professional institutes. But it's from these institutions that you train workforce. But when you have a situation where you don't have the facilities to train them in line with global, expectations, you cannot fit in. It's a problem. I tell you, by privilege, I supervise students in the university, at least most of them the first class, the brilliant ones. In fact, we were talking about brain drain to the to the first world, to the north. There is also brain drain from the public to the private sector, which will destroy our public sector finance. And this is within the framework of younger people who have no interest in taking their brains to the public sector. You have very good, take the universities for instance, very good brilliant students, you supervise them, you're excited. Can you, I've been willing to supervise you for a PhD. By privilege, I've produced at least not less than 20 PhDs. Those bright ones tell you no, I'm not interested. So what are your plans for life? They don't tell you, I would like to be a lecturer better. I will have to find my way somewhere in the private sector. So if these things, the issue of public universities or the universities are not properly, dealt with, what you are going to have is a reproduction of mediocrity, which will invariably worsen the skill gap in this country. It's a reality. Kobiaso speaks about it as a union, but it is a very serious. Sometimes I feel a lot of pain because those are the crop of persons that should impart knowledge on other people. The ones that are coming on are the ones to second class, this and that. And for you to supervise them, you've got to sweat because they're not good material. So we need to look at that. Thank you.
I think that ends it for now. So I just want to thank the presenters, Professor Dafe Otobo, Professor of Industrial Relations, University of Lagos, Mr. Adewale Oyerinde, Director General of NECA, Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, Barrister Osai Ojigo, Executive Director, Amnesty International Nigerian Office, Barrister Malaki Bumadu, is the lead partner of Bumadu Chambers, former President of Civil Rights Organization, Bashman Mohammed, of the American Center for International Labor Solidarity, representing his country program director, Ismail Bello, Deputy General Secretary, representing President of Nigeria Labour Congress, and Anthony Gochukwu, Executive Secretary, National Human Rights Commission. I want to thank you all, and I want to thank the resource persons and Chair of Sessions, Dr. Christiana Famro, and then Professor Ifeanyi Onyonoru. Thank you very much. We have come to the very last part of today's session, and just to remind you that it doesn't quite end today. We have a second day and fully packed, lots of presenters for tomorrow, and one of the speakers for tomorrow will be the ASU president, so it's something to look forward to. I'm sure you know that. Okay. Also, just before the chairman of today's occasion, the standing chairman for today's occasion, in the person of the chairman of the National Salaries, Incomes and Wage Commission, he would end the session as the chairman, standing chairman. I also want to let us know that tomorrow's session starts by 9 o'clock, so we need to be here early. Instead of the rapporteurs to give us a report today, we'll push that to the first activity for tomorrow. So by tomorrow, they'll give us a summary of the proceedings for today, okay, just to conserve time. That's to show you we care about your welfare. And then I also want to welcome back the Director General, Michael Imolu, National Institute for Labor Studies. He was stepped out briefly to attend to a few other official matters, so he's back with us. He will be chairing tomorrow's sessions. As a matter, he will be the chairman of tomorrow's program, so we look forward to listening to him too. He's also a fire eater because he's a comrade. Okay. This is simply for logistic and planning purposes, so no intention to discriminate. So for catering for this afternoon, the organization is like this. All resource persons, we're all having late lunch, you know, we're having our late lunch in the same hall, all right? So, but we'll do it like this for just planning and organizing reasons. The resource persons, the chief executives here, and all the presenters would move first out of this door, from this door, and then the others would proceed out of the other end. So, but we're all heading for the same hall. So please take note. Thank you very much. So I invite Ekbo, Nta, Esquire to just help us round up the session. Program for today. So photographers, the batch of photographers, just like the others.